Chapter 1789. Meng Chuan fled while Allegheny chased after him. The remaining hundreds of soldiers from Tianfu territory lost their courage to fight when they saw this scene. They flew up like a flock of frightened birds and rushed toward the crack in the protective barrier of Tianfu territory. After all, they were only an army formed by the natives, not emotionless robots. It was unrealistic to expect them to fight to the death and fight for Meng Chuan while their leader was fleeing. On the other side, the evolvers from Tianfu territory were also thinking of retreating. These evolvers from Tianfu territory were indeed experts. They were sent to ambush Bai Xiaowen. If Bai Xiaowen was only as strong as he had been on the dinosaur planet, he would have been taken down without a doubt. The fact that Tianfu territory had sent out two top-level experts, Xia Jincheng and Qi Zheng, was already a cautious move. However, they didn't expect that the strength Bai Xiaowen had displayed on the dinosaur planet was only the tip of the iceberg. The powerful forces under the surface of the sea had yet to be revealed. Qi Zheng was dead, and Bai Xiaowen commanded his summoned creatures to surround Xia Jincheng. Xia Jincheng was indeed powerful. He was a level 18 lord, and his sword mastery had reached a level that Bai Xiaowen had never heard of before. Every thrust of his sword was either as heavy as a mountain or as light as a feather. It felt like his sword had reached the pinnacle of the realm. Abaddon, the butcher, and the demon lord from Dark Resurrection were besieged by Xia Jincheng, but they were still suppressed by him. It looked like Xia Jincheng was besieging all three of them. If it weren't for the help of the other long-range summoned creatures and Xia Jincheng being distracted by Bai Xiaowen, the outcome of the battle would have been decided in a few moves. The combat mastery of the three heavenly kings is still too weak. Bai Xiaowen shook his head and sighed. In the Dark Age plane, high-level demon lords and even high-level kings didn't have unimaginably high combat mastery. According to Bai Xiaowen's observations, they were only at the specialist level at most. The difference between a familiar level and a specialist level wasn't particularly obvious. It was just that the technique was more skillful. However, it was different when one surpassed the specialist level. They had already reached the level of master. There was a profound mystery that could only be understood and could not be described with words. For example, Xia Jincheng's swordsmanship, or Xia Feng's saber skills, which he had seen before, had transcended the three levels of the mundane. After Bai Xiaowen used the sky primordial lightning, he took a breather and joined the siege on Xia Jincheng. He did not feel any moral pressure. It looked like a group fight, but in fact, these summoned creatures belonged to Bai Xiaowen's ability. He and Xia Jincheng could only be considered as a one-on-one fight. A one-on-one fight between summoners was just that righteous. Bai Xiaowen was still using a weakened version of the lightning strike strategy, using a small amount of true inner force to force Xia Jincheng to reveal a flaw. With the experience of killing Qi Zheng, Bai Xiaowen believed that no matter how strong Xia Jincheng's fighting mastery was or how strange his movements were, he would not be able to escape the observation of the Eye of Evolution and the prediction of the super brain. Qi La. A thin bolt of lightning struck down. Xia Jincheng swung his sword in a circle, and a vigorous repulsive circle spread out, forcing the lords who were besieging him to retreat. At the same time, the long sword rotated, and circles spread out like ripples. The thin bolt of lightning fell on the ripples and was dissipated layer by layer, finally dissipating into nothingness. Bai Xiaowen's expression changed slightly. Xia Jincheng did not dodge. Instead, he took the lightning strike head-on. In this way, the prediction of the Eye of Evolution and the super brain was useless. After all, this kind of prediction could only guarantee a hit rate. If the opponent faced it head-on, it would be useless. Although Xia Jincheng and Qi Zheng are both top experts, their roles are different, and their fighting styles are also very different. My fighting style can perfectly restrain Qi Zheng, but it can't gain any advantage over Xia Jincheng. Bai Xiaowen had the Eye of Evolution and the super brain. He was like a sniper rifle that had been equipped with a super scope cheat. Qi Zheng was an assassin who relied on stealth and speed to survive. He had high attack and low defense. His damage depended on critical hits, and his defense depended on dodging. In front of Bai Xiaowen's sniper rifle, which had a high hit rate, he could only end up with a grievance. Xia Jincheng, on the other hand, was a swordsman who was good at head-on combat. He relied on physical skills, sword moves, to deal damage. He relied on his own vigorous spiritual power and superior sword defense. He was like a tank with high armor. It was obvious that he took the sniper rifle's bullets head-on. Of course, he had the advantage. If Qi Zheng and Xia Jincheng were to fight to the death, it would be hard to say who would emerge victorious. Bai Xiaowen favored Xia Jincheng, but if Qi Zheng could make use of his advantage in assassination, he could also find an opportunity to kill Xia Jincheng in one shot. In fact, Xia Jincheng was stronger than Qi Zheng. Although Qi Zheng was known as the second assassin of the Interstellar Alliance, the second assassin of the Interstellar Alliance was definitely not the same as the second expert of the Interstellar Alliance. He might not even be able to squeeze into the top 10 or top 20. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes. He went through the primordial thunder's hand seals in his mind and pointed out. He quickly changed his strategy. Xia Jincheng's dodging ability was not as good as Qi Zheng's, so there was no need to aim for a hit. He could just use his strongest single-target attack. Bai Xiaowen absolutely did not believe that Xia Jincheng could withstand the primordial thunder. After all, Bai Xiaowen was currently sitting on the silver throne. Even if he had a master-level sword mastery or above, he could not ignore the huge gap in spiritual energy value. The meandering thunder and lightning entered through the gaps between the butcher and Abaddon. Like a venomous snake, it pounced on Xia Jincheng. At this time, Xia Jincheng could only take a defensive stance. His long sword drew a cloud-like circle, once again forming a kind of ripple-like domain, layer by layer, reducing the power of the invading primordial thunder. However, the power of one shot of primordial thunder was more than 3 times that of the weakened lightning strike. Xia Jincheng's whole body trembled. The power of the weakened lightning strike was still transmitted to his body, leaving behind an electric current the thickness of a chopstick. It was like a small electric snake. Bai Xiaowen's fingers suddenly clenched. The electric snake suddenly locked onto Xia Jincheng's wrist, causing his palm to temporarily go limp and numb. Of course, the other feudal lords beside them would not be idle either. Abaddon's lance suddenly pierced out, and Xia Jincheng barely managed to dodge. The sharp edge of the lance brought about a strong wind, cutting through Xia Jincheng's black clothes. This small change meant that Xia Jincheng's protective spiritual energy was relatively weak. The butcher grinned and suddenly swung. The saw blade of wicked fire drew a green semicircle arc. Xia Jincheng had a bad feeling in his heart. He suddenly stabbed forward, and a strong repulsive force appeared, causing his body to retreat quickly. However, a line of blood bloomed. From Xia Jincheng's shoulder to his waist, a mournful wound quickly appeared. The concussive wound caused by the saw blade of wicked fire was still wreaking havoc on Xia Jincheng's wound, causing his wound to be unable to heal and enter a long period of bleeding. This is not good. Xia Jincheng suddenly crushed a black ball, and with a bang, black smoke spread out. Chapter 1790. Xia Jincheng was completely lost in the pitch-black smoke, and the subsequent attacks of the summoned creatures missed their target. However, Xia Jincheng didn't stay in the smoke for long. Even Qi Zheng's earth escape technique couldn't escape Lu Wang's senses, let alone his half-baked concealment tool. The moment he used the smoke bomb to disrupt the attacks of the summoned creatures, Xia Jincheng's figure was like a hawk as he pounced toward Bai Xiaowen. In an instant, the surging sword qi converged into a tidal wave, madly sweeping towards Bai Xiaowen's silver throne. 11th style. Wind stop. Every single strand of sword qi was spinning rapidly like a top. Naturally, it carried an extremely strong penetrating force. Hundreds and thousands of strands of sword qi were like hundreds and thousands of drills. At this moment, Bai Xiaowen was also a little shocked. The thick defense formed by his protective true essence was actually in danger. Xia Jincheng was actually able to break through his true yuan barrier, which surprised Bai Xiaowen. Bai Xiaowen's true yuan barrier wasn't any weaker than a true high-level king's. This meant that Xia Jincheng had the ability to injure a high-level king. Even though he knew that Xia Jincheng's attack could be a diversion, Bai Xiaowen still couldn't gamble his life with his opponent. In Bai Xiaowen's eyes, Xia Jincheng's life was far less valuable than his own. Bai Xiaowen immediately gave up on the idea of continuing to attack Xia Jincheng. Instead, he circulated his True Yuan and continuously strengthened his True Yuan barrier. Of course, he still had to make full use of his advantage in numbers. Bai Xiaowen scanned with his spiritual sense and located Xia Jincheng's figure in the black smoke. Then, he shared his vision with the summoned creatures and ordered them to attack Xia Jincheng's back. At this moment, Xia Jincheng was already injured. If Butcher attacked him with another saw blade, Xia Jincheng would most likely die here. 12th style, Wind Vortex. Xia Jincheng shouted. Thousands of tiny sword qis suddenly circled around him like a giant sword qis tornado, revolving around his body. The surrounding qi of heaven and earth seemed to be driven by Xia Jincheng's wind vortex. The weaker summoned creatures were sucked in as if they had encountered a super strong tornado and were instantly torn to shreds. Only a few Lord tier and rare commander tier summoned creatures relied on their own strength to resist the suction and stabilize themselves. Within the vortex, Xia Jincheng's figure shot up like a rocket into the sky. At the same time, among the group of experts from the Great Yan territory, there were actually two people who rushed over without any regard for their own safety, blocking the pursuit of the summoned creatures. They wanted to use their own lives to cover Xia Jincheng's escape. As expected, he wants to escape. You're quite capable. However, the cohesiveness of the Great Yan region is truly astonishing. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes. Behind his head, one of the three sword seals suddenly flew out, flying above Xia Jincheng at an extremely fast speed. In the next second, Bai Xiaowen, together with the throne, teleported above Xia Jincheng, blocking his escape route. You can't escape. Bai Xiaowen's tone was flat as he stated this fact. The two sword moves just now were indeed of a certain standard. How many more times can you use them? Xia Jincheng panted violently, and the surface of his skin was abnormally red. Under Bai Xiaowen's insightful eyes, Xia Jincheng's heart was like a high-powered water pump, wildly beating, urging a large amount of spiritual power to flow along his meridians in overload. In the meridians where the butcher's saw blade had forcefully shrunk, stopping the blood from flowing out. Shrinking part of the meridians would inevitably affect the performance of his strength, so Xia Jincheng used some kind of temporary strengthening secret technique to overload the undamaged meridians and burst out with strength not inferior to his peak state. Doing this was tantamount to drinking poison to quench one's thirst. When the explosive state passed, the injury would only worsen. Of course, Xia Jincheng had no other choice. If he didn't go all out, he wouldn't be able to escape. Now, the more despairing reality was that even if he went all out, he wouldn't be able to escape. Looking up at the evil demon's eye in the sky, Xia Jincheng's eyes flashed with a trace of despair and madness. Ninth move, Cloud Suppression. The clear sound that seemed to pierce through gold and split stone, and the huge sound of the blade piercing out caused Bai Xiaowen to be dazed for a moment. In the next second, the tip of the sword was pointed at Bai Xiaowen's throat. At the same time, the meridians in Xia Jincheng's sealed wound burst open inch by inch, and blood sprayed out. He was betting his life on this sword. Unfortunately, the speed at which Bai Xiaowen recovered from his absent-minded state exceeded Xia Jincheng's expectations. Shifting positions, Bai Xiaowen's figure on the throne disappeared, leaving only an illusory sword mark that was pierced by Xia Jincheng's sword into a rain of light that filled the sky. Bai Xiaowen's figure appeared behind Xia Jincheng. The invisible blade flashed with light and slashed horizontally. At this time, Xia Jincheng's protective spiritual power was almost completely gone. It was cut open at the waist without any suspense, and his corpse fell to the ground. The moment Xia Jincheng died, the entire battlefield seemed to freeze for a few seconds. The morale of the Great Yan experts completely collapsed. Although Qi Zheng and Xia Jincheng were both powerhouses among the high-level lords in charge of leading the team this time, Xia Jincheng was the leader this time, and his prestige far surpassed Qi Zheng's. With Xia Jincheng's death, the Great Yan experts immediately fell into a chaotic situation without a leader. Bai Xiaowen commanded the 13 Fiend Lords to launch the final attack. It was worth mentioning that although the morale of the Great Yan experts was low, no one was willing to surrender to avoid death. In the end, these people were all killed by the savage Fiend Lords. Bai Xiaowen was secretly amazed, but he didn't have the time to feel emotional about these Great Yan experts. He commanded the White Phoenix 5-element banner army that appeared in the second spiritualist projection to attack the remnants of the Heaven Mansion army. There was no need for Bai Xiaowen to use his spiritual power to create a physical projection. He only needed to rely on the most basic command formation, and it was enough to exterminate the remnants of the enemy. Of course, the remnants of the Heaven Mansion army weren't as stubborn as the Great Yan experts. When they saw that there was no hope of victory, they all knelt and surrendered. Bai Xiaowen hurriedly ordered the Fiend Lords to stop and accept these people's surrender. In the end, these people were natives, and they weren't completely loyal to Meng Chuan. Their thoughts could be changed. The outcome of the battle was decided. Guo Baisheng and the other evolvers of the Great Xia territory came in front of Bai Xiaowen with complicated expressions and discussed the follow-up matters with him. In this battle, Guo Baisheng and the others didn't have much room to play. It was basically Bai Xiaowen and the Fiend Lords under his command who decided the outcome of the battle. Guo Baisheng and the others were actually watching over the Devil Bone army, and didn't let them act rashly. He really couldn't bring himself to say such a small amount of contribution points. Chapter 1791. After this battle, Guo Baisheng and the others understood that White Phoenix Lord LV Wang had the power to dominate the Interstellar Alliance. In terms of individual strength, he had killed Qi Zheng and Xia Jincheng consecutively. It seemed that he was on par with Xia Feng. Of course, Guo Baisheng didn't know exactly how strong Xia Feng was. It was just a guess. "Thank you, Lord LV Wang. Lord LV Wang is too strong." Bai Xiaowen felt a little awkward when he heard the praise of these Great Xia evolvers. Were the Great Xia territory made of steel? Even their praises were so dry and unpolished. Bai Xiaowen could only say humbly, "You flatter me." Guo Baisheng said, "Lord LV Wang, don't be too humble. Qi Zheng and Xia Jincheng are both experts supported by the Great Yan Territory's Extreme Path Martial Arts Academy. They are both ranked in the top 10. They are quite powerful." Extreme Path Martial Arts Academy? Sounds interesting. Bai Xiaowen smiled, a bit like a gangster. Guo Baisheng said, "Lord Xia Feng was also a member of the Extreme Path Martial Arts Academy." Bai Xiaowen's eyes widened slightly. He was a little surprised. Xia Feng was originally a member of the Great Yan Territory? Later on, he left the Great Yan Territory? There must be a complicated story behind this, but Bai Xiaowen wasn't interested in digging into it. The timing wasn't right either. Bai Xiaowen looked up and saw a green meteor shooting towards him from the sky. It was the King of Pride, Arrogant. He was holding a bloody arm in his hand as he flew towards Bai Xiaowen with an unlucky expression. "Alleganti? You went to catch Meng Chuan. Did you succeed?" Bai Xiaowen asked even though he knew the answer. Arrogant presented the arm to him. "Christos, my lord," Arrogant added. "That guy is very good at escaping. I caught up with him 3 times in a row, but he still managed to escape into the realm gate. I only managed to take a few parts." Guo Baisheng's expression was very interesting. Meng Chuan was a veteran lord who ruled over a territory, and he had many ways to escape. His ability to escape was definitely not something a normal lord could compare to. It was normal for the she-devil to be unable to catch up to Meng Chuan. However, she had actually caught up to him 3 times and even managed to pluck off one of his arms. There was one more thing that Alleganti didn't say. She had chased him all the way through the cracks in the protective shield. Meng Chuan fled into the Astral Realm Gate, the Astral Realm Gate that had been temporarily opened at great cost for the sake of this invasion, but Arrogant was still hot on his heels. Meng Chuan's loyalists had risked their lives to block Alleganti's pursuit in front of the Dimensional Gate, allowing Meng Chuan to escape with his life. However, the enraged Alleganti still decided to vent his anger on Meng Chuan's death warriors. He unleashed a soul-tearing ripple and killed dozens of death warriors guarding the portal. At this time, Alleganti looked unlucky because he was worried about being punished by Bai Xiaowen. This was how the hierarchy of demons worked. When the higher-ups were unhappy, they would often vent their anger on the lower-ups. Moreover, Alleganti was feeling guilty. After all, she had called Bai Xiaowen a bastard and failed to capture Meng Chuan. Unexpectedly, Bai Xiaowen didn't make things difficult for her. He only nodded slightly and asked her to stand aside. "What's going on? Aren't you going to scold me?" Pride King was a bit surprised. He looked at Bai Xiaowen's calm face and felt a new wave of anger. "Did you think that I wouldn't be able to capture Meng Chuan from the start? Damn it, how dare you look down on me? Bring me the leader of the Twisted Bone Region's army," Bai Xiaowen ordered. Abaddon and the Butcher brought the leader of the Twisted Bone Region's army, a level 16 native commander, to the left and right. The man had a panicked look on his face. He was surrounded by the auras of powerful beings. He was just a small mid-rank commander, so he didn't even have the space to stretch his limbs. "Why did you confront Baisheng and the others just now? Do you know that what you're doing is actually helping Tianfu territory invade your territory?" Bai Xiaowen wasn't even interested in asking for the man's name. He directly asked, "What exactly are you planning? You should know that the Twisted Bone region is a vassal territory of the Great Xia, right? Or did you already know about Shaoxing's scheme and betray the Great Xia?" The man hurriedly denied, "No, I didn't." "If you didn't, then what about them? Who wants to betray the Great Xia?" Bai Xiaowen's gaze swept over the hundreds of low-rank and mid-rank natives in the Twisted Bone region. "Is there anyone else who wants to stand up for Shaoxing?" Bai Xiaowen's gaze swept over them. Almost everyone in the Twisted Bone region's army lowered their heads. These people had indeed been roped in by Shaoxing. Shaoxing had probably instilled in them the idea of being loyal to him. In this scheme, the Twisted Bone region's army was clearly the force that Shaoxing wanted to rely on. However, a snake without a head couldn't do anything. No one had expected that Shaoxing would be suppressed by Bai Xiaowen as soon as he appeared. Unless Shaoxing had activated his scheme the moment Bai Xiaowen appeared and used the power of the 7-star formation to suppress Bai Xiaowen while simultaneously staying away from Bai Xiaowen, he would have been able to prevent Bai Xiaowen from capturing the leader first. Speaking of which, Guo Baisheng and the others had been beside him at that time. The Tianfu territory's army hadn't yet engaged in battle, so it really wasn't the time to act. According to Shaoxing's plan, Bai Xiaowen should have used a medium to summon a group of elites from the White Phoenix territory army. When the two sides engaged in battle, he would control the 7-star formation to reverse and cooperate with the Tianfu territory army and the Great Yan experts lying in ambush to capture Bai Xiaowen alive, eliminate the elites of the White Phoenix army, and subdue Guo Baisheng and the others. Doing this would also eliminate the resistance of the White Phoenix territory and lay the foundation for annexing it later. Therefore, Shaoxing didn't stop Bai Xiaowen from using the first spirit medium projection. Trapping the White Phoenix territory army was also one of the goals of the Tianfu territory and the Great Yan territory. Bai Xiaowen had thought of this and concluded that he had enough time to counterattack. He wouldn't face the worst situation as soon as he walked out of the teleportation gate. Of course, even if he faced the worst situation, Bai Xiaowen was still confident that he could take care of the other side. Powerful strength was the only way to break the rules and run amok. After reprimanding the army of the Shriveled Bone territory and making sure that this army wouldn't cause trouble for the defeated Shaoxing, Bai Xiaowen discussed the follow-up with Guo Baisheng and the others. Now that we can confirm that Shaoxing is the spy, then the news he brought might not be true. Guo Baisheng was a little worried. Lord Xiafeng definitely isn't suppressed in the Great Yan territory, so where could he have gone? Bai Xiaowen smiled. Actually, I've already guessed it. But in order to confirm my guess, let's wake this guy up. Bai Xiaowen flicked his finger and Shaoxing, who was lying on the ground, was electrocuted. He jumped up like a live fish. Chapter 1792. Shaoxing had been knocked unconscious by Bai Xiaowen, but he woke up after being stimulated by the electric current. However, Xiao Xing's spiritual energy was still firmly restrained by Bai Xiaowen's power of the Grim Reaper. Without his spiritual energy, Xiao Xing couldn't do anything. Xiao Xing, the truth is clear now, Guo Baixing said with a complicated expression. You are undoubtedly the mole behind Sir Xiafeng's disappearance. I don't understand why you betrayed Sir Xiafeng, but now, I hope you still have some conscience left and tell us where Sir Xiafeng is trapped. Xiao Xing looked at the tragic battlefield around him and glanced at the leader of the bone-melting army. The latter lowered his head and didn't dare to look at him. After a few seconds, Xiao Xing finally understood that while he was unconscious, the war had already ended. The army of the Tianfu territory and the experts of the Great Yan territory had all retreated. The bone-melting army had also been intimidated. Xiao Xing understood that he had been completely defeated. Facing Guo Baixing's interrogation, Xiao Xing remained silent. Bai Xiaowen said, Xiao Xing, you don't have to resist by remaining silent. Xiao Xing's voice was hoarse. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know where Sir Xiafeng is either. Bai Xiaowen smiled and said, Sir Xiafeng is very wary of the people of the Great Yan territory and the Tianfu territory. He will only lower his guard against you. Therefore, I can conclude that you must have led Sir Xiafeng to a certain place, and this place definitely won't arouse his suspicion. You must know where he is. Behind Guo Baixing, the evolvers of the Great Xia territory started to make a ruckus and insult Xiao Xing. Bai Xiaowen stared at Xiao Xing and said slowly, he's in the bone-melting army, right? Xiao Xing's pupils contracted for a moment, and his aura also changed slightly. Although he quickly regained his composure, Bai Xiaowen had already gotten the answer he wanted. It seems that my speculation is correct, Bai Xiaowen said with a smile. It's an unexpected but reasonable answer. It seems that what happened was that Lord Xiafeng came to the bone-melting ridge, and you activated the bone-melting ridge's array to suppress part of his strength. Then, the experts of the Great Yan region who were lying in ambush surrounded him and suppressed him. Am I right? I don't know what you're talking about, Xiao Xing repeated. Bai Xiaowen shook his head and said, it doesn't matter if you don't cooperate. Your series of plans, even if you can hide it from Baixing and the others, you can't hide it from your cronies in the bone-melting region. Among these natives, there must be some who know something. It's the same if I ask them. It'll just take a little more time. Guo Baixing shouted angrily, Xiao Xing. What exactly do you want? Are you still going to stubbornly resist? Have you forgotten how much Lord Xiafeng has taken care of you? If it weren't for his timely intervention, you would have been buried with your original territory. Guo Baixing began to list the help that Lord Xiafeng had given Xiao Xing one by one. Xiafeng was like Bai Xiaowen, generous to his teammates. After letting Xiao Xing inherit the bone-melting region, Lord Xiafeng was extremely tolerant of the bone-melting region. He gave it great independence and even used the resources of the Great Xia region to help rebuild the bone-melting region after the war. The bone-melting region's status as a vassal territory was inseparable from the support of Lord Xiafeng to the point where it could develop to the same level as the Golden Stone region. As the only remaining teammate of Xiafeng and Xiao Xing, Guo Baixing was very clear about this. He even told Xiao Xing about the help that Lord Xiafeng had given Xiao Xing when he was awakened. Bai Xiaowen listened from the side and narrowed his eyes slightly. Lord Xiafeng and I are a bit similar, of course, this similarity was mainly in terms of personality. They would spare no effort to help their teammates grow. Lord Xiafeng was even more selfless. Bai Xiaowen was also willing to help his teammates grow. However, when he encountered some equipment and items that were more suitable for him, he would not take the initiative to show his style and give them away. This was because Bai Xiaowen was more rational. He felt that these powerful equipment could bring him more benefits. If he gave it to his teammates, it would be difficult to bring out the upper limit. The difference between the two was obvious. Lord Xiafeng was better at fighting on the spot, while Bai Xiaowen was better at planning. If Lord Xiafeng had this kind of personality, would he really have an irreconcilable conflict with my sister? Bai Xiaowen put himself in Lord Xiafeng's shoes. If he stood in Lord Xiafeng's position, he would focus on cooperation with his sister's Xueli region. the possibility of a war breaking out was not high. After all, Bai Xiaowen knew his sister's personality very well. She was gentle and rational, not aggressive. "Don't say anymore, don't say anymore." Xiao Xing sat on the ground and stared at the ground as he muttered. Perhaps Xiao Xing had found his conscience, or perhaps he could not withstand the mental pressure of Bai Sheng, or perhaps he knew that the situation was hopeless. He no longer resisted and revealed the place where Lord Xiafeng was imprisoned. Sure enough, it was in the forbidden area in the north of the Melting Bone region. This forbidden area had existed since Xiao Xing became the lord of the Melting Bone region. No one was allowed to set foot in it, including Xiao Xing. Every once in a while, Lord Xiafeng would visit the forbidden area of the Melting Bone region. It was because of this rule that Xiao Xing could cooperate with the Great Yan region and the Heavenly Mansion region to set up a trap. According to Xiao Xing, the people of the Great Yan region did not dare to confront Lord Xiafeng directly. Thus, they sent Fu Jun, the formation master of the Extreme Path Martial Arts School, to spend a long time setting up a formation in advance. After Lord Xiafeng stepped into the forbidden area, they would activate it and trap him in the forbidden area. They would use the power of the formation to continuously wear down Lord Xiafeng's strength. When Lord Xiafeng's oil ran out, the people of the Great Yan region would act and put an end to it. There's a forbidden area in the Melting Bone region? What kind of forbidden area is it that Lord Xiafeng cares so much about it? Bai Xiaowen's heart skipped a beat. Xiao Xing did not hide it anymore and said faintly, "Perhaps it's the secret to Lord Xiafeng's strength. That's why even I can't set foot in it." Nonsense, Lord Xiafeng is not such a person. If there's something that can make him stronger, he will definitely share it with us. Unless the secret is harmful to us, he will not forbid us from entering. Guo Baishan clearly did not know about the existence of the forbidden area. He had never heard Lord Xiafeng mention it either. "Alright, let's go take a look at the forbidden area," Bai Xiaowen said with a smile. "I have some knowledge about formations. Let's see if I can break the formation set up by the formation master of the Extreme Path Martial Arts School." Guo Baisheng said gratefully, "Then I'll leave it to you, Lord Luang." "What about Xiao Xing?" someone asked. Many of the evolvers of the Great Xiao region all spoke up. "This kind of person should be executed." Guo Baisheng said, "He can't do anything now. Why don't we detain him for now? After we rescue Lord Xiafeng will decide how to deal with him." Xiao Xing heard this and only smiled silently. He did not object. Someone was very dissatisfied with Xiao Xing's smile and said coldly, "If I were him, how would I have the face to see Lord Xiafeng? I would just slit my own throat and be done with it." This Xiao Xing is probably hoping that Lord Xiafeng will spare his life. How shameless. Chapter 1793. Guo Baisheng and the others, along with Xiao Xing and Bai Xiaowen, quickly arrived at the back mountain of the bone-melting ridge's forbidden area. At this time, the formation set up by the Extreme Path Martial Arts Academy's formation master Fu Jun was operating at full power. Therefore, Bai Xiaowen could see the range of the formation and wouldn't rashly walk into it. After walking around the forbidden area's back mountain, Bai Xiaowen said, "You said the person who set up the formation is called Fu Jun? He's really a formation master. Lord Luang, what's so special about this formation?" Guo Baisheng asked. "In the end, this formation is still a model of the Seven Stars formation. It's fused with the Bone-Melting Ridge's protective formation and becomes a part of the Bone-Melting Ridge's Great Formation," Bai Xiaowen said. The formation itself is made up of 49 small Seven Stars formations. They're all interconnected and infinitely mysterious. This formation should be called the Star Formation. It should be considered Huaxia's pinnacle of formations. Bai Xiaowen's description wasn't complete. This was the pinnacle of formations that ordinary cultivators could set up. However, compared to an immortal formation, there was still a fundamental difference. Guo Baisheng said, "Lord Luang, do you have a way to break it?" Bai Xiaowen said with a smile, "It's actually very simple to break the formation. This star formation uses the bone-melting ridge's Great Formation as its power source. As long as the bone-melting ridge's Great Formation is stopped, the formation will automatically stop. That's indeed very simple, Guobaisheng said in realization. However, the bone-melting ridge's Great Formation is constantly operating. Under normal circumstances, it won't stop at all. Therefore, this star formation will never stop. The key authority to stop the Great Formation is in Xiaoxing's hands. No wonder Fu Jun is confident that he can trap Lord Xiaofeng with this formation. Bai Xiaowen said with a smile, "Xiaoxing, you should know what to do, right?" Xiaoxing was silent. Then, he said to Bai Xiaowen, "Release me so that I can stop the Great Formation." "No," an evolver said. "As long as we kill Xiaoxing and inherit the bone-melting ridge's boundary steel, we can still take over the Great Formation. Why should we give this bastard a chance to escape?" Xiaoxing's lips moved, but he didn't say anything. Bai Xiaowen said, "Xiaoxing, you should also want to meet Mr. Xiaofeng, right?" Xiaoxing lowered his head in silence. "I think Sir Xiaofeng would also like to meet you." Bai Xiaowen raised his hand and grabbed Xiaoxing's wrist. He slowly pulled back the death god's power and released Xiaoxing's shackles. Xiaoxing didn't flee. Perhaps he knew that he couldn't escape. After recovering his spiritual energy, he stopped the formation in his territory. The star cluster grand formation that enveloped the mountain behind the forbidden area also came to a standstill. A clear whistling sound rang out as a black-clothed figure shot out from the forbidden area. He scanned the surroundings in the air before landing in front of everyone like an arrow. It was Mr. Xiaofeng. Xiaofeng carried the broken blade on his back and had a handsome face. Although he had been trapped for a long time and his strength had been worn down by the array of stars, he was still in high spirits. "Lord Xiaofeng." The group of evolvers from the Great Xia territory finally saw their backbone and rushed forward. Mr. Xiaofeng wasn't good with words. Facing everyone's excitement, he only nodded slightly. After looking around, Mr. Xiaofeng's gaze went past Xiaoxing and finally landed on Bai Xiaowen. "What happened when I was trapped?" Guobaisheng hurriedly recounted the events. "I see." Mr. Xiaofeng looked at Bai Xiaowen with a serious expression. "I owe you a favor." Mr. Xiaofeng's favor was very heavy. Bai Xiaowen smiled and said, "I'm only returning Lord Xiaofeng's favor. Now, we don't owe each other anything. I still have some things I want to talk to Lord Xiaofeng about. However, Lord Xiaofeng, please deal with the traitor first. We'll talk after you rest." Mr. Xiaofeng nodded solemnly. "Okay." Facing Xiaoxing, Mr. Xiaofeng simply asked 3 words. "Why?" Xiaoxing looked at Mr. Xiaofeng and took a deep breath. He actually revealed a bleak smile and slowly said, "Do you still remember when we first met during the awakened period?" Mr. Xiaofeng nodded slightly. "I remember. At that time, I was only level 5, and you were already level 7. You were also the leader of a 3-man team." A look of nostalgia appeared on Xiaoxing's face. "That's right. Back then, we worked together to kill that boss called Ord. We discovered that your abilities complemented our team, so we recruited you. Your growth rate is truly astonishing. After 2 planar explorations, your strength has already caught up to mine. No, it should be that you surpassed me." Mr. Xiaofeng said, "You're different from me. You're good at support and crowd control. You're the brains of the team. I'm good at direct combat. We can't compare." Later, we met Big Brother Gua. We finally gathered the 5 of us and challenged the Great Unification. Xiaoxing smiled and said, "Mr. Xiaofeng, do you know? At the final moment of unification, I had selfish motives and took all the contributions that I could snatch. But I didn't expect that you would still rely on head-on battles to become a Lord-level evolver." Mr. Xiaofeng tilted his head. Xiaoxing continued, "Because I was jealous of you. I was jealous of your combat talent. I longed to be the only lord in the 5-man team, the eternal leader." Guobaisheng said indignantly, "It was during the final unification war that I saw your selfishness." Mr. Xiaofeng, everything you have today is due to your own talent and hard work. To be honest, if it wasn't for Mr. Xiaofeng, this mainstay, you wouldn't have been able to get the Lord-level evaluation. Xiao Xing ignored Guo Baixing and continued, later, we entered the Star Alliance together. The gap between us grew bigger and bigger. You were also recruited by the Great Yan region. In less than 2 months, you were accepted into the Extreme Path Martial Hall. I offered my services but was rejected. Mr. Xiaofeng said indifferently, I quit. Yes, I'm even more indignant. Why did you abandon something that I couldn't get? Why was my territory invaded by others and forced to self-destruct, but you were able to defend the Great Xia region? Mr. Xiaofeng, you're too outstanding, too dazzling. Your existence made the people of your generation pale in comparison. Guo Baixing said, didn't Mr. Xiaofeng give you the Melting Bone region? What are you dissatisfied with? Xiao Xing said, Mr. Xiaofeng, I want to ask you a question. What's going on with the forbidden area of the Melting Bone region? Is there a secret to your strength inside? Mr. Xiaofeng hesitated for a moment, then slowly but firmly shook his head. No. Xiao Xing smiled. As expected, I was wrong. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes and thought, could it be that Xiao Xing thought that there was a secret to becoming stronger in the forbidden area and that Mr. Xiaofeng wasn't willing to share it with Xiao Xing? Thinking of this, Bai Xiaowen couldn't help but interrupt. Xiao Xing, you're too narrow-minded. If the forbidden area has a secret to becoming stronger and Mr. Xiaofeng isn't willing to share it with you, you can just swallow the Melting Bone region into the Great Xia region. Why would you need to separate the Melting Bone region and let you manage it? Shouldn't the secret to becoming stronger be in your own hands? Chapter 1794. As soon as Bai Xiaowen said this, many people secretly nodded. If there really was a secret to becoming stronger, and Xiaofeng wanted to take it for himself, he would definitely turn the Xiaogu territory into a part of the Great Xia territory. Xiao Xing's expression was dark. No one knew whether he believed Xiaofeng's denial or Bai Xiaowen's analysis. Looking at him, he probably believed that there was no secret to becoming stronger in the Forbidden Land. Guo Baixing said, Lord Xiaofeng, Xiao Xing has committed a grave crime this time. How should we punish him? The evolvers of the Great Xia territory didn't say anything. Instead, they looked at Xiaofeng. This meant that they all respected Xiaofeng, but it couldn't be denied that they all hated Xiao Xing to the bone. The higher Xiaofeng's prestige was, the deeper their hatred for Xiao Xing was. Xiaofeng said calmly, Xiao Xing, hand over the Xiaogu territory's boundary steel, and leave. I don't want to see you again. When this sentence was said, many evolvers of the Great Xia territory revealed looks of dissatisfaction. In their eyes, Xiao Xing had betrayed the Great Xia territory and harmed Xiaofeng. He had almost destroyed the entire Great Xia territory. Even 1,000 cuts would be a light punishment. Although Xiaofeng had taken back Xiao Xing's authority, he had let him go so easily. How could they accept this? Immediately, many people spoke up and asked Xiaofeng to punish Xiao Xing severely. Xiaofeng looked around. His gaze seemed to have materialized, and everyone's voices instantly quieted down. This is my decision, Xiaofeng said simply. Guo Baixing's expression was complicated. In the end, he nodded and said, yes, we respect Lord Xiaofeng's decision. Guo Baixing's prestige in the Great Xia territory was very high. He was probably second only to Xiaofeng in terms of importance. His attitude made the others lose the courage to continue arguing. However, there were still quite a few people who cast disdainful or resentful gazes at Xiao Xing Bai Xiaowen's side in his heart. Just from this matter alone, Xiaofeng wasn't a qualified leader. However, he was a reliable friend. Xiaofeng said to Bai Xiaowen, okay, that's all for Xiao Xing. What do you want to say to me? Bai Xiaowen looked at Guo Baixing and the others. Mr. Xiaofeng, may I have a word with you? Mr. Xiaofeng nodded and said to Guo Baixing, take Xiao Xing away. Guo Baixing nodded. He waved his hand and ordered the other two to take Xiao Xing and lead the other evolvers out of the forbidden area. Only Xiaofeng and Bai Xiaowen were left near the forbidden area. Go ahead, Mr. Xiaofeng said briefly. Bai Xiaowen took a deep breath. I would like to ask Lord Xiaofeng about the story of this bone-melting collar. Mr. Xiaofeng's body trembled slightly as he carefully sized up Bai Xiaowen. Bai Xiaowen felt a lot of pressure being stared at by Mr. Xiaofeng. He could feel that the pressure Mr. Xiaofeng gave him was much stronger than Xia Jincheng's. Even though they were both high-ranked lords, there seemed to be a considerable gap in strength. After carefully looking at Bai Xiaowen, Mr. Xiaofeng said slowly, "Follow me." Bai Xiaowen didn't understand and followed behind Mr. Xiaofeng. The two climbed along the small path at the back of the mountain. It was strange. Mr. Xiaofeng clearly had the ability to fly, but he still climbed the mountain on foot. Bai Xiaowen didn't understand, but he could only follow. After reaching the peak of the forbidden area, Mr. Xiaofeng looked at the vast expanse of sand in the distance and slowly said, "This territory used to be called the Snow Collar. The sandbar in front of you was originally a plum forest. The scenery was very beautiful." Bai Xiaowen looked at the sand under his feet and thought about the scenery of the Snow Collar. He nodded and said, "It was very beautiful, but it's gone now." Yes, this beautiful plum forest is just like the previous owner of the Snow Collar. However, both no longer exist. They were both destroyed by my hands, Mr. Xiaofeng said. You're talking about the founder of the Snow Collar, Hua Xueli. Bai Xiaowen tried his best to keep his voice calm. Mr. Xiaofeng suddenly said, "The starling thinks she's called Hua Xueli, but they don't know her real name." "Do you know what her real name is?" Bai Xiaowen asked. "Is this very important?" Mr. Xiaofeng nodded. "You want to ask me about the story of the Snow Collar?" "Of course, I have to confirm if you're qualified to hear it." Bai Xiaowen was silent for a long time before he said word by word, "Her name is Bai Xiaohua." Xiaofeng's eyes, which were like cold stars, suddenly shot out a divine light. He suddenly reached out and grasped Bai Xiaowen's wrist. "So it's you." Bai Xiaowen was a little surprised. He felt that he couldn't avoid Mr. Xiaofeng's grip. If Mr. Xiaofeng had any ulterior motives, Bai Xiaowen would inevitably suffer a loss. However, Bai Xiaowen stood alone in front of Mr. Xiaofeng because he made the decision based on his own judgment. Through observation from the side and the front, he felt that Mr. Xiaofeng wasn't that kind of person. In particular, the 4 words that Mr. Xiaofeng blurted out made Bai Xiaowen tremble as if he had been struck by lightning. Mr. Xiaofeng realized that he had lost his composure. A rare smile appeared on his stiff face and he let go of Bai Xiaowen's wrist. "I'm now sure that you're qualified to hear this story. Come with me, we're entering the forbidden area." In the center of the forbidden area was a stone cave. A broken blade floated at the top of the cave. Looking at the style, it seemed to have come from the same saber as the broken blade that Mr. Xiaofeng carried on his back. The material and color were very similar. And that broken blade seemed to have a life of its own. It contained an extremely sharp aura, as if it would turn into a rainbow and chop off his head in the next moment. This is one of the restrictions that I left behind. It will attack any life form that enters the cave other than me. Every time I come here, I'll fill it with enough true qi. Mr. Xiaofeng patted Bai Xiaowen's shoulder lightly. A gentle aura enveloped him. "All right, go in." Enveloped by the aura that Mr. Xiaofeng had given him, the broken blade seemed to regard Bai Xiaowen as an ally. After jumping twice, it calmed down. Bai Xiaowen entered the cave. To his surprise, he discovered that the walls of the cave were carved from an extremely sturdy yellow crystal. This yellow crystal was a dark gold grade material. Dark gold material was actually carved into a cave. If this news were to spread, who knew how many people would be jealous? Carving this dark gold material was not a simple matter. It required a martial arts expert to wield a carving knife with tyrannical force to leave a shallow mark on the surface. After stepping into the cave, there was a long and narrow tunnel. Mr. Xiaofeng walked slowly in front, his footsteps gentle. He did not turn his head and said slowly, "Your real name is not Lu Wang, but Bai Xiaowen, right?" Bai Xiaowen nodded. "So you've already guessed it?" Mr. Xiaofeng said, your appearance is very similar to Xiaohua, Bai Xiaowen said. When I was on the evolutionary platform, I used spiritual energy to hide my appearance. I can see your real appearance. Mr. Xiafeng turned around and said. Chapter 1795. Bai Xiaowen was shocked. Could it be that Xiafeng also had the Eye of Evolution? However, this was unlikely. After all, there were many ways to see through the disguise, and the Eye of Evolution was not the only one. Xiafeng then said, you should also be able to see my true appearance, right? Bai Xiaowen nodded. He had already seen it with the Eye of Evolution and said, you didn't hide your appearance, only your hair color, yes. Xiafeng stretched out his hand and brushed the top of his head. The image of his black hair instantly changed and turned into a white-haired young man. He looked a few years older out of thin air. We're here. Xiafeng stopped in his tracks. At the end of the corridor was a small tomb. The tomb was cold and there was a carefully carved crystal coffin. Bai Xiaowen's eyes flashed. The Eye of Evolution automatically sent information. The crystal coffin was actually made of an epic-grade ice element material, cold jade essence stone. However, Bai Xiaowen did not care about the information sent by the Eye of Evolution. His eyes were attracted by the person lying in the crystal coffin. The gentle and beautiful face that seemed to be sleeping slowly overlapped with his memory. Bai Xiaowen's figure froze. The person lying in the crystal coffin was his sister, Bai Xiaohua. Xiafeng stood silently at the side and did not disturb Bai Xiaowen. On the side of the crystal coffin, 2 lines of words were engraved on the yellow crystal wall. Buried in the spring, the mud melts the bones, I send the snow to the human world. The handwriting was strong and the style was delicate. This was a poem by Bai Ji. Bai Xiaowen's mood slowly calmed down. He looked sideways at Xiafeng. What is going on? Xiafeng stood in front of the crystal coffin and looked at Bai Xiaohua's face lying inside. He said slowly, I remember that it was a snowy day in the Xueli territory. I met Xiaohua. She said that she was seriously injured and could not be cured no matter what. She could only wait for death. But before she died, she entrusted me with one thing, the Xueli territory. She wants me to inherit Xueli territory and hand it over to someone. Xiafeng's words were very brief, but Bai Xiaowen had completely understood them. His father, Bai Yuantang, was right. His sister Bai Xiaohua had indeed suffered a soul curse during the exploration of the universe's secret regions, causing her soul to slowly crumble and die. Therefore, elder sister went to Xiafeng and asked him to take over Xueli territory and hand it over to her. Mr. Xiafeng's narration was somewhat scattered, but he spoke slowly and clearly. I asked Xiaohua who did this to her. I want to avenge her. Xiaohua always shakes her head. Yeah, Xiaohua doesn't want to implicate me. In terms of ability, Xiaohua is much stronger than me. She's so smart and quick-witted, unlike me who only knows how to use brute force to solve problems. Even she was plotted against and ended up like this. If I go and take revenge, I'll just die in vain. In the end, I could only follow Xiaohua's wishes and gradually become enemies with Xueli territory, then personally kill her. According to Xiaohua's arrangements, I changed the name of Xueli territory and destroyed all traces of her, treating it as a normal territory invasion. No different from the real invaders. Bai Xiaowen was silent, digesting Xiafeng's words. Bai Xiaowen knew more about the situation than Xiafeng. He could also understand why elder sister made such arrangements. The enemy who put the soul curse on elder sister Bai Xiaohua must know her identity. Xiafeng wanted to take over Xueli territory without attracting the attention of a strong enemy, so he had to act as if he was Bai Xiaohua's enemy. As for killing Bai Xiaohua, it was just a show. Bai Xiaohua, whose soul had dissipated, was destined to die. After Bai Xiaohua's death, her gradually dissipating soul came to the awakened realm of the spirit realm through the means of her father, Bai Yuantang, and finally met Xiao Rui. Xiafeng's low voice interrupted Bai Xiaowen's thoughts. No matter what, I'm still the murderer of your sister. If you resent me, I won't blame you. Bai Xiaowen's eyes were looking at Xiafeng's white hair. Bai Xiaowen reached out and held Xia Feng's hand. Xia Feng looked up, and the two of them looked at each other. I'm sorry. Bai Xiaowen said in a low voice, I've made you bear so much. You must feel terrible in your heart. Xia Feng closed his eyes. After a long while, he opened his eyes, and there was a trace of moisture in his eyes. How many people could understand the torment of killing the person they loved most with their own hands? If it wasn't for this torment, how could Xia Feng, who was in his prime, have a head of white hair? Bai Xiaohua's body was buried in the bone-melting collar, but at the same time, Xia Feng's love should also be buried. The two talented youths looked at each other in front of the crystal coffin in this stone cave for a long time without saying a word. After an open and honest conversation, the situation became clearer. Although Bai Xiaohua insisted on not telling Xia Feng who the enemy was, Xia Feng had been using his own methods to investigate. When Bai Xiaohua explored the universe's secret realm, he had a thorough understanding of the various forces that explored at the same time as her. Among them was Gundor. When Bai Xiaowen heard this, he suddenly realized that Xia Feng seemed to have a deeper meaning when he declared war on Gundor. He probably listed Gundor as a suspect. Gundor is really unlucky. Bai Xiaowen said with a smile, however, with Lord Kenneth's ability, it seems that he can't place that kind of curse on my sister. Xia Feng nodded and said, this is also the reason why I let him go. Actually, there was another very suspicious force that explored the secret realm at that time. Who? Great Yan territory. Hearing Xia Feng say these three words, Bai Xiaowen was not surprised. From Xia Feng's attitude toward the Great Yan territory, Bai Xiaowen could guess a few things. I'm actually very suspicious of the Great Yan territory. From this incident, the Great Yan territory's actions are very strange. They don't seem to care about their status in the Interstellar Alliance. Bai Xiaowen said. What do you mean? Xia Feng was puzzled. Bai Xiaowen sighed in his heart. His sister Bai Xiaohua's judgment was very accurate. Xia Feng's political sensitivity was still relatively poor. However, from another perspective, Xia Feng could still become a lord and grow so quickly. It was enough to see his outstanding combat talent. The Great Yan territory is the core territory of the Pan-Asian Union and has a high status. However, the Pan-Asian Union is a loose confederation that is maintained by the prestige of the Great Yan territory and the trust between each other. However, did the Great Yan territory not consider the possibility of the conspiracy being exposed when they plotted against you in Shueli territory? Once the conspiracy is exposed, it will be a huge blow to the Pan-Asian Union, and it is very likely that the Great Yan territory will lose its position as the leader. Xia Feng nodded slowly. You have a point. Bai Xiaowen said again, I think that the lord of the Great Yan territory, Xia Yan, is not a fool. Since he did this, was he forced to? In other words, was there a higher power directing him? Chapter 1796. When Xia Feng heard Bai Xiaowen's shocking words, he frowned and said, but the Great Yan territory is already one of the most powerful territories in the Star Alliance. Who can order Xia Yan to make such an unwise decision? Bai Xiaowen said, I once heard Lord Candace say that the territories in the Star Alliance are divided into 7 grades. Pan-Asia's Great Yan territory, God's Court's Below's territory, and the World Illumination Society's Boyd territory are all ranked in the 2nd grade? Xia Feng said, I've also heard of the saying. Others say that the 1st grade territories are the ones that are hidden and involved with extraterrestrial civilizations. But this saying is not necessarily credible. Maybe it's just a rumor. Just like the UFO rumors on Earth in the Christian era, most of them were groundless rumors, and none of them could be confirmed. They only fatten countless popular science and entertainment workers. Bai Xiaowen nodded and said, I'm only talking about one possibility. In fact, there's another higher possibility. Lord Xia Feng. Xia Feng waved his hand and interrupted him. You don't have to call me that. Just call me by my name, or call me brother. I'll call you second brother like Xiaohua. You'll probably see my younger sister again in the future. Okay, brother Xia, have you heard of the God's Chosen One? Bai Xiaowen said after a slight pause. I am, Xiafeng said. Bai Xiaowen was slightly surprised. This is an unexpected situation. Which God's chosen one are you? If you can't tell me, just pretend I didn't ask. Xiafeng said casually, there's nothing that can't be said. I'm the chosen one of the God of Truth. Bai Xiaowen said carefully, it's said that to be the chosen one of the gods, one must dedicate everything to the gods. In front of the gods, one has no power to resist, and there's no privacy to speak of. Only in this way will the gods give the chosen one great power. Xiafeng shook his head and said, I've heard that many gods with a strong desire to control are like this. However, the God of Truth I believe in doesn't seem to have a similar tendency. Other than giving me 2 pointers, he didn't do anything else, and he didn't directly give me any power. Is that so? Perhaps this God is different from the other gods. Bai Xiaowen could only explain it this way. However, it was better to be safe than sorry. Bai Xiaowen originally wanted to share some secrets with Mr. Xiafeng, but he couldn't say them out loud. The God of Truth had never looked into Xiafeng's heart before, but it did not mean that he would not do so in the future. No matter what, the secret of his father, Bai Yuan Tang, had to be hidden from the gods and not let them know. Xiafeng was not sharp enough to notice the change in Bai Xiaowen's mentality. Instead, he continued to say, Second brother, what do you mean by God's voters? Bai Xiaowen said, I suspect that Xiayan, the Lord of Dian, is also an elector. Him targeting you might be an order from the god behind him. This possibility is much higher than extraterrestrial civilization. Xiafeng himself was a chosen one, so of course, he knew that gods did exist. Compared to the illusory extraterrestrial civilization, he could certainly accept this theory more. Bai Xiaowen had deeper concerns. He did not know how deep the influence of the God of Truth on Mr. Xiafeng was. However, he could only put this aside for the time being and concentrate on dealing with the threat in front of him. Brother Xia, I have recorded the process of the Dian territory assisting the Tianfu territory's invasion with the Demon's Eye. Submitting it to the Interstellar Alliance is an irrefutable piece of evidence. It is enough to make the Dian territory the target of public criticism, and even the Pan-Asian Alliance may fall apart. Xiafeng listened and nodded. The Dian territory is the biggest suspect in Xiaohua's death. I have always wanted to go there, but I was worried that Xiayan had too many supporters. Now that we have this evidence, we can at least make most of the lords in the Pan-Asian Alliance remain neutral. As for the few hardcore lackeys such as the Tianfu territory, they are simply insignificant. Bai Xiaowen thought deeper and said, our forces are still a little weak. My idea is to use this opportunity to pull the neutral lords in the Pan-Asian Alliance to our side. Xiafeng shook his head. It's very difficult. Those neutral lords do not dare to go against the Dian territory. I did not ask them to directly participate in the confrontation, Bai Xiaowen said. I have recently conquered 2 dimensions and obtained a lot of raw materials. I am going to rope in some territories with high-end manufacturing capabilities and establish an economic alliance. Xiafeng was a little puzzled. Bai Xiaowen continued, the ultimate goal of an economic alliance is to tie the neutral lords to our war chariot. However, to do this, not only must we have strong economic strength, but we also need a strong leader. Brother Xia's prestige in the Interstellar Alliance is enough to carry this banner. With Xiafeng's participation, those neutral lords would be able to profit, and their concerns about joining the alliance would be greatly reduced. Although Bai Xiaowen rose rapidly, he became famous too late. Even if he had dazzling achievements, his prestige was not as deep as Xiafeng's. Of course, in the later stages, as Bai Xiaowen's achievements increased, his prestige in the Interstellar Alliance would gradually increase, and then the foundation of the alliance would be more stable. Xiafeng showed a slightly stiff smile and said, you and Xiaohua are a little alike. Xiaohua is right, her brother is a very smart person. With you in charge, I can rest assured. From that stiff smile, Bai Xiaowen could see endless loneliness. Let's go. There are still many things to do. Bai Xiaowen sighed softly, took one last look at his sister's sleeping face, and walked out of the forbidden area. Xingwu City. Guo Baixing led a group of people to welcome them, his face full of panic. Lord Xiafeng, Lord Luwang. Xiao Xing, he committed suicide. Xiafeng's body shook, but he didn't ask why. Guo Baixing lowered his head and said, Xiao Xing only said that he let you down, I understand. Xiafeng's voice was muffled. Bring his body back to Great Xia for a proper burial. Yes, Guo Baixing said. Bai Xiaowen was deep in thought. Xiao Xing really committed suicide? If he committed suicide, why didn't he do it in front of Xiafeng? That way, he would be more remorseful, and he would be able to make Xiafeng feel and understand. The fact that he didn't commit suicide in front of Xiafeng meant that he didn't want to die. Perhaps many people were unhappy that Xiafeng let Xiao Xing go so easily. There were two possibilities. The first was that many people were unhappy and mocked Xiao Xing, causing him to be so ashamed that he chose to commit suicide. The other possibility was that Guo Baixing and the others were unhappy with Xiafeng's punishment and secretly killed Xiao Xing. Of course, this was less likely. No matter what, although a lord like Xiafeng had prestige, he wasn't wise enough to see through people's hearts. If it was Bai Xiaowen, he would at least take a look at Xiao Xing's body. With Bai Xiaowen's observation skills, he would definitely be able to see some clues. Perhaps Xiafeng didn't want to pursue the matter anymore. Chapter 1797. Xiao Xing's betrayal this time has caused great harm to the Great Xia. Xiafeng stood in the middle of the crowd, his voice low and slow. If White Phoenix Lord Luwang hadn't seen through Xiao Xing's scheme, the consequences would have been unimaginable. To thank Luwang, I've decided to give the Twisting Bone territory to the White Phoenix territory as a vassal territory. The evolvers of the Great Xia territory all felt a little abrupt. Giving him a vassal territory as a gift, this gift of gratitude was too great. However, considering Luwang's help to the Great Xia territory, it didn't seem inappropriate to thank him like this. The key was that Xiafeng's prestige was very high, and Guo Baixing was loyal to him, so no one raised any objections. This was also the method that Bai Xiaowen and Xiafeng had discussed. Bai Xiaohua had entrusted the Xueli territory to Xiafeng as a proxy. Now that he had met Bai Xiaohua's younger brother, Xiafeng naturally had to pass the entrusted item to the rightful owner. From Bai Xiaowen's point of view, the significance of his sister's territory wasn't as simple as a vassal territory. Moreover, his father, Bai Yuantang's first spiritual sense, had once said that he wanted Bai Xiaowen to take back the Xueli territory. After completing this step, Bai Xiaowen would be able to meet Bai Yuantang's second spiritual sense. Giving the Twisting Bone territory to Bai Xiaowen under the pretext of a thank you gift was also to avoid the suspicions of the Great Yen territory and the enemies behind it. Bai Xiaowen was then led to the boundary stone of the Twisting Bone territory. After dismissing the people around him, he pressed his palm on the boundary stone. The spirit world's laws quickly notified him that he had obtained control of a new territory's boundary stone. Since he was already the lord of a territory, the White Phoenix territory, he couldn't have two territories at the same time. He had to choose to annex, inherit, or destroy within 24 hours. Bai Xiaowen wasn't in a hurry to choose, because a spiritual light had already been projected into his mind from the boundary stone of the Twisting Bone territory. Bai Xiaowen closed his eyes, and his spiritual sense sank into his sea of consciousness. In his sea of consciousness, a familiar figure appeared once again. It was his father, Bai Yuantang. We meet again. It's shorter than I expected. Bai Yuantang's spiritual sense revealed a slight smile. Looks like you've grown very quickly. Our plan is proceeding very smoothly. Bai Xiaowen naturally had many questions in his mind. He prioritized the questions he asked. Dad, you said that big sister was cursed by the enemy's soul, causing her soul to gradually dissipate. Now, can you tell me who this enemy is? Sure. Bai Yuantang replied, that person is the chosen of the cursed true god. Xiaohua saw his true appearance the moment she was hit and told me about it. Bai Yuantang waved his hand, and the mist in his sea of consciousness gradually condensed into a silhouette, turning into a fair and handsome young man. This young man's skin was extremely white, and his face seemed to have no trace of blood, as if he had just recovered from a serious illness. There were also heavy dark circles under his eyes. His entire body was wrapped in a gray robe, revealing only his face. However, this appearance was very recognizable. Bai Xiaowen would be able to recognize him based on this face alone. Bai Xiaowen asked, "What's this person's name? Is he related to the Great Yan region?" Bai Yuantang shook his head. "I'm not sure either. My knowledge is limited." Bai Xiaowen wanted to ask more, but Bai Yuantang smiled and said, "Don't be impatient, kid. My spiritual sense can only appear for a limited time. Let me finish telling you what to do next." "Okay." Bai Xiaowen knew that he was being too impatient. This was also because there were too many mysteries that could not be solved since stepping into the Interstellar Alliance. His father, Bai Yuantang, happened to be the forerunner and key person who knew many secrets. Bai Yuantang's expression turned serious. 100 years of spiritual source have passed, yes. Bai Yuantang continued, the spiritual realm and earth are both about to undergo a great change. The source of this change, as well as the final answer to all the questions, lies in one place. Bai Xiaowen's expression turned serious. "Where?" Bai Yuantang said, "The original Star Palace, the battlefield of the gods, the maze realm of the gods. The outside world has many different names for this place. I prefer to call it the Land of Origin." "What exactly is in this Land of Origin?" Bai Xiaowen asked. Bai Yuantang smiled. "Everything. Those who pray for truth will find endless knowledge there. Those who pray for strength will find endless power there. Those who pray for destruction will find the end of the universe there. Those who pray for immortality will find eternal life there." Bai Xiaowen was attracted by Bai Yuantang's description. He said, "It sounds like a holy land that people yearn for." Bai Yuantang smiled. "Yes, but it's a pity that no matter how many people enter the Land of Origin, no matter how noble or selfish they are, or how great or how small their aspirations are, only one person can achieve it in the end. Everyone else is just a foil. Of course, it's more likely that everyone will return empty-handed." Bai Xiaowen's eyebrows twitched. "It'll definitely cause intense competition. The competition has already begun before entering the Land of Origin," Bai Yuantang said. "You must first obtain a ticket to the Land of Origin before you are qualified to enter." "Ticket?" Bai Xiaowen repeated. The ticket to the Land of Origin is actually a bit similar to the ticket to the spiritual realm and the awakened planes. It's an item that looks very ordinary, but contains very unusual energy particles. It requires a very high identification skill to see its true value. However, you have the Eye of Evolution, so you don't have to worry about not being able to recognize it. Bai Yuantang's figure gradually began to fade as he said this. He smiled and said, "Work hard. Only when you enter the Land of Origin will you be able to see the last spiritual thought I left behind. When that time comes, I'll tell you what to do." "Dad, do you think I can find a way to revive Sister in the Land of Origin?" Bai Xiaowen suddenly asked. "I can't answer your question. After all, the secrets hidden in the Land of Origin are beyond my understanding." Bai Yuantang's legs had already turned into spots of light. "However, from the conclusion I've made many prophecies, there's a lot of hope," Bai Xiaowen hurriedly asked. "Dad, do you know who the God of Truth is?" Bai Yuantang's light figure had completely faded. At the last moment before turning into spots of light, Bai Xiaowen saw him nod. "Phew. There's still too little time, and there are too many things I want to ask. However, I finally see hope." Bai Xiaowen finally threw out a choice question. There was a reason why he didn't directly ask who is the God of Truth. Bai Yuantang's spiritual thought could be seen as a highly intelligent program. It was all designed and left behind by Bai Yuantang in advance. There was too little time left. If there was a question and answer, Bai Yuantang's spiritual thought wouldn't be able to answer in time. It was better to throw out a yes or no choice question. Now it seemed that Bai Yuantang knew the identity of the God of Truth. In that case, when he entered the land of origin in the future, he could find his third spiritual thought and ask it clearly. Chapter 1798. Bai Xiaowen slowly opened his eyes. Bai Yuantang's appearance seemed like they had talked for a long time, but in truth, the conversation was carried out through his thoughts. It was as fast as lightning, and only an instant passed in the outside world. Everyone could only see that Bai Xiaowen had accepted the lord rights of the Tanggu territory. Congratulations, Lord Luwan. You have obtained another territory. Congratulations, Lord Luwan. From now on, the relationship between the Great Xia and White Phoenix territories has deepened. We must help each other. Guo Baisheng and the other evolvers all congratulated Bai Xiaowen, hoping that the White Phoenix territory would stand on the same side as the Great Xia territory. Xia Feng did not bother, looking out of the window in a daze. Bai Xiaowen knew what the evolvers of the Great Xia territory were thinking. They definitely felt that the Great Yan territory was giving them too much pressure, and Xia Feng did not have many strong allies. The strength of the White Phoenix territory had already been partially verified, so the evolvers of the Great Xia territory naturally had to make use of it. Bai Xiaowen would not tell them about the relationship between the White Phoenix territory, Shueli territory, and the Great Xia territory. He smiled and said, "Of course, the White Phoenix territory is also being eyed by the Tianfu territory and even the Great Yan territory. Since we have a common enemy, we should help each other." Guo Baisheng and the others were delighted. Following which, they held a meeting in the Tanggu territory. Although Xia Feng sat on the main seat, he spent most of his time in a daze. As for the follow-up matters, it was Guo Baisheng and Bai Xiaowen who discussed them. "Lord L.V. Wang, we've heard of your idea of establishing an economic alliance, and we're all in favor of it. Great Xia has a group of mature craftsmen. Although they don't have any masters, they have no problem creating standard equipment and general supplies. We can also participate in this alliance." Bai Xiaowen nodded. Building an economic alliance is only the first step. The key is to pull in other territories that are interested in cooperating and share the benefits. In the end, we will tie them to our chariot. However, there is a prerequisite. "What prerequisite?" Bai Xiaowen said. "The Great Yan territory has a very high prestige in the Interstellar Alliance. We have to beat it down to the ground so that more territories will dare to cooperate with us." Guo Baisheng slapped his thigh. "Exactly." Bai Xiaowen smiled and took out the demon eye. "It just so happens that I recorded the process of the experts of the Great Yan region participating in the ambush in the bone-melting region. Xia Jincheng and Qizeng are both well-known figures in Starlink. This video and the corpses of the two experts are ironclad evidence." Guo Baisheng said, then put the evidence in the chat group of the Lords of the Blue Planet and ruined Xia Yan's reputation. Bai Xiaowen was just about to speak when he suddenly received a notification from the spirit realm. Xia Yan, the Grand Yan Overlord of the Blue Star Overlord Group, had sent him a private message. The message was very simple. "It's all a misunderstanding. The Great Yan territory is willing to compensate you with 100,000 spirit crystals." Bai Xiaowen relayed the news to the others. On the other side, Xia Feng had also received a similar message. However, the Great Yan territory's chip was 1 ton of frost essence jade. Seeing Bai Xiaowen's inquiring gaze, Xia Feng explained, "The frost essence jade is a resource that the Great Xia territory has been collecting." Bai Xiaowen thought of the crystal coffin where his sister, Bai Xiaohua, was sleeping and nodded. The frost essence jade had a strange cold aura that was hundreds or even thousands of years old. When used as a coffin, it could prevent the corpse from rotting for many years, just like a newly dead person. Of course, this was only one of the uses of the frost essence jade. More people used it to create accessories, necklaces, and other equipment. How many gold or even dark gold accessories and necklaces could be created with a ton of frost essence jade? The price that the Great Yan territory offered to Xia Feng was indeed not low. That old thing Xia Yan also has a day when he's nervous," Guo Baisheng said angrily. He offered 100,000 spirit crystals and a ton of dark gold materials in one go. What a big deal, Xiaofeng said. It's not like he's losing anything. Bai Xiaowen nodded. Yes, 100,000 spirit crystals and a ton of frost essence jade can preserve the Great Yen territory's special status in the Star Alliance and maintain the relationship with the Pan-Asian Alliance. It's worth it. Lord Xiaofeng, Lord Luang, are you two planning to make a deal with that old bastard Xia Yan? Guo Baixing felt that something was wrong. Xiaofeng said, that's what I'm thinking. When the frost essence jade was carved into a coffin, the strange cold aura it contained would constantly dissipate, and its protective effect on the corpse would not be as good as before. Therefore, a new batch of frost essence jade had to be exchanged every 1 or 2 years. This was also the reason why Xiaofeng kept collecting frost essence jade. Bai Xiaowen frowned. Wait a minute. He sent a message back to Xia Yan. 200,000, for me to get over the shock. Not long after, Lord Xia Yan replied, deal. Deal in person in the arena box of the Blue Planet's Evolver platform. Bai Xiaowen was slightly stunned. I feel like I lost a bargain. Is this a scam? Xiaofeng said, I'll go with you. Guo Baixing's head was about to explode. Lords, wait a minute. You can't let go of the Great Yen territory just because of this small profit, right? Although it's not a small profit, it's still more important than destroying the Great Yen territory. Bai Xiaowen smiled. Old Guo, even if you don't agree to the deal, can you destroy the Great Yen territory by spreading the news? Guo Baixing shook his head. That's right. This matter will at most make the Great Yen territory anxious and tarnish its reputation, but it won't shake its foundation or hurt its bones. Bai Xiaowen smiled and said, so, it's good to seek a large profit from it for your own development. Most importantly. Seeing that Bai Xiaowen was lost in thought, Guo Baixing hurriedly asked, what's the most important thing? I always feel that the Great Yen territory's attitude is a bit too rational. Bai Xiaowen said, after all, they've lost 2 experts from the Extreme Tavern and a dozen other elite evolvers this time. I think Xia Yan should be gnashing his teeth at me and Lord Xiaofeng. But he actually proposed peace talks first to restore the Great Yen territory's reputation. Guo Baixing trembled. He's indeed a bit too rational. It's precisely this kind of attitude of choosing to keep the peace that makes people suspicious. Bai Xiaowen said, I think it's very likely that he's trying to lower our guard, and he'll do something else later. However, it's actually a good thing that the Great Yen territory wants to pay the price for peace, because our territory's development speed is much faster than theirs. I'll drag this out for a while, and I still have some more important preparations to complete. When I'm done, it won't be too much of a pressure to confront the Great Yen territory. Bai Xiaowen then said to Xiaofeng, Brother Xia, have you heard of the Dark Age plane? I've heard of it. Of course, Xiaofeng knew. This was the plane that Mengchuan had poured a lot of energy into trying to conquer, but Bai Xiaowen snatched it from him. Chapter 1799. Bai Xiaowen said, I've only conquered a small part of the Dark Age dimension. This dimension is very important to us. If we can make peace with the Great Yen region for the time being, I would like to invite Brother Xia to continue exploring the Dark Age dimension with me. According to Bai Xiaowen's estimation, Xiaofeng's overall strength should not be inferior to a high-level king-level powerhouse, especially in the area of combat specialization. He would definitely be of help in the exploration of the Dark Age dimension. At the mention of conquering the dimension, Xiaofeng's attention became focused, and he became very focused. How far have you progressed in developing that plane? Bai Xiaowen glanced at Guo Baixing and did not speak. Guo Baixing understood very well, and he called the other evolvers to leave. After everyone had left, Bai Xiaowen gave a brief summary of the situation. Bai Xiaowen had already killed a god's descendant, and now there were 2 god's descendant creatures left in the Dark Age dimension. After hearing this, Xiaofeng was still somewhat moved. You can actually kill a god's descendant? Xiaofeng was puzzled. I was lucky. Commander-type evolvers are really strong sometimes. Xiaofeng touched his chin. With my current strength, it's a bit difficult to deal with high-level king-level demons. I definitely can't kill a god's descendant. Bai Xiaowen smiled and did not speak. In fact, he was also quite envious of Xiafeng's carefree solo adventure in the spiritual realm. All of his strength was concentrated in one person, and it was actually more efficient. Commander-type powerhouses like Bai Xiaowen needed to gather an army every time to fully exert their strength. Although the upper limit was high, the lower limit was also very low. The most important thing was that it required a lot of planning and layout, and it took too long. Only someone like Bai Xiaowen, who had a super brain, could quickly gather an army every time he went to a place. If it were someone else, it might not be effective even if they spent 2 or 3 times the time. Of course, now that he had the power of death and the 4 undead heavenly kings, it was not too difficult to gather an undead army, but it still took time to accumulate. How could it be as carefree as a lone swordsman like Xiafeng, who could sweep the world with only one sword? Bai Xiaowen returned to the White Phoenix domain. The restless people of White Phoenix territory all breathed a sigh of relief when they saw Bai Xiaowen return safely. Bai Xiaowen briefly explained the situation to his friends. Then, he asked Xiao Rui to pass the boundary marker of the White Stone Ridge to Cecilia. After that, Bai Xiaowen passed on the Xueli territory, which was still known as the Shrinking Bone territory, to Xiao Rui. Perhaps it was because of the relationship between Xiao Rui and Bai Xiaohua, but Bai Xiaowen felt that it was the best choice to hand over his sister's territory to Xiao Rui. Then, Bai Xiaowen informed Jinmi about the establishment of an economic alliance and the participation of Great Xia. Guo Baixing represented Great Xia and joined in the negotiations. The core of the economic alliance that Bai Xiaowen was preparing to establish was the Great Xia territory, the White Phoenix territory, the Wuzhou territory, and the Candace territory. There were also some other lords who were actively negotiating with Candace to join the alliance. After Bai Xiaowen set the bottom line for these negotiations, he left the rest of the work to his friends to help Jinmi complete. As for Xiafeng, he left everything to Guo Baixing of Great Xia to handle. Guo Baixing also played the role of a general manager in Great Xia. After doing all this, Bai Xiaowen, Xiafeng, and the Lord of Great Yan territory, Xia Yan, met at the agreed location of the Blue Star Evolutionary platform. Xia Yan's figure was tall and thin. His aura was calm, and he looked like an ordinary middle-aged man. His eyes were also hidden, and it was impossible to tell that he was the lord of a super territory. Bai Xiaowen's attention was not focused on Xia Yan. His attention was focused on an ordinary-looking young man standing on the left side of Xia Yan's entourage. This young man's appearance had been disguised, and he just looked very ordinary. Under Bai Xiaowen's Eye of Evolution, this little trick of disguise could not be hidden. Bai Xiaowen could see the other party's true appearance with just a glance. The young man looked delicate, and his skin was extremely white. He had thick dark circles under his eyes, and he looked like he had just recovered from a serious illness. Bai Xiaowen's eyes flashed slightly, and he forced himself to look away. This young man who looked like a tuberculosis ghost. That's right, he was the person that Bai Xiaowen's second spiritual sense had shown to him. He was the person who had cursed his sister Bai Xiaohua's soul. He was also the culprit who caused his sister Bai Xiaohua's soul to dissipate. He was the enemy of Bai Xiaowen and Xiafeng. My 2 nephews, I'm really sorry to have troubled you to make this trip. Xia Yan chuckled and said, Xiaofeng, my subordinates acted on their own because you were disrespectful to me. You won't blame me, right? This was a blatant lie. Xiafeng snorted and ignored him. Xia Yan seemed to be used to Xiafeng's rudeness. He smiled at Bai Xiaowen and said, You're Lu Wang? The younger generation will surpass us in time. I thought that Xiaofeng was already at the peak of the younger generation. I didn't expect someone to surpass him. Bai Xiaowen smiled and said, Lord Xia Yan's time is precious, and we don't dare to waste it. You didn't ask us to come here just to chat, right? Let's get to the point. The entourage behind Xia Yan immediately scolded Bai Xiaowen for being disrespectful to Xia Yan. Only the tuberculosis ghost did not speak and looked on coldly. Xia Yan smiled and waved his hand to stop them. After the scolding subsided, Xia Yan said, "All right, Lord Lu Wang is a straightforward person, so I won't beat around the bush." Soon, Bai Xiaowen and Xia Feng signed a contract with Xia Yan. Xia Yan used 200,000 spirit crystals, to buy Xiaowen, and a ton of cold jade as the price to reach an understanding. Bai Xiaowen and Xia Feng would restrain their subordinates and not leak the matter of this war involving the Great Yan territory. In exchange, the Great Yan territory would no longer target the Great Xia territory and the White Phoenix territory. The latter two territories would also not target the Great Yan territory. The scope of this restriction included everyone from the lords to the armies and citizens of the three territories. It needed to be noted that in the world of evolvers, there were no rules of the spirit realm. They could only rely on items to bind them. Xia Yan took out an extra item. It was a dark bronze cauldron with dark red patterns on it. It was called the Blood Oath Cauldron. The three of them signed a contract and left a drop of blood and a spiritual imprint in the Blood Oath Cauldron. During the validity period of the item, the three parties could not violate the contract. Those who violated the contract would receive a backlash from the Blood Oath, and their strength would drop by 1 to 2 realms. Furthermore, they would not be able to make any progress in their profession manuals or combat specializations. As an item, the Blood Oath Cauldron would automatically dissipate after a year after it was used. In other words, the validity period of this contract was 1 year. Chapter 1800. After the contract was signed, the Cauldron of Blood Oath turned into psionic particles and left a small pattern of the blood cauldron on Xia Yan, Bai Xiaowen, and Xia Feng's wrists. However, the atmosphere in the air did not ease at all. Xia Yan seemed to be careless as he said, "Little Feng, Lu Wang. This matter ends here. It's good for you young people to be aggressive, but you have to remember the saying, what's hard is easy to break. Don't regret it only after you've suffered a great loss." Xia Feng ignored Xia Yan's words. Bai Xiaowen smiled and said, "Thank you for your advice, Lord Xia Yan. There's a saying that one will not turn back until they hit the wall, but us two brothers are quite stubborn. I'm afraid that even if we hit the wall, we might not change our minds. You said that young people are aggressive, but if we're not, how can we still be called young?" That makes sense. Interesting. Everyone has their own ambitions. There's no point in talking too much. Xia Yan stood up and waved his hand. "Goodbye." Watching the people from the Great Yan region leave, Bai Xiaowen asked telepathically, "Brother Xia, do you recognize the young man standing to Xia Yan's left?" Xia Feng said, "I recognize him. I saw him at Extreme Path Gym. His name is Xia Jinshi. He's Xia Yan's second son." Bai Xiaowen said deliberately, "That person doesn't look like Xia Yan at all." Xia Feng heard the hidden meaning in Bai Xiaowen's words. He smiled and said, "That face is just a disguise that Xia Jinshi often uses. I can see through his disguise with Mirror of Heart and see his true nature. Speaking of which, you should be able to see through his disguise too, right?" Bai Xiaowen smiled and nodded. "He looks like a tuberculosis patient. It's not strange that he's trying to hide it. Brother Xia, what skill is this Mirror of Heart you mentioned?" Xia Feng said, "It's a talent I obtained after my combat specialization was upgraded. It's actually a sublimation of a martial artist's intuition. Other than being able to see through disguises, it can also predict danger." "What level is your specialization upgraded to for you to obtain this special ability?" Bai Xiaowen asked curiously. He felt that Qi Zheng and Xia Jincheng, whom he had met before, seemed to have the ability to predict danger. Mr. Xia Feng said, "When you reach the master level, special abilities will appear, but everyone's special abilities are different. Big Brother Xia probably likes to be straightforward, so he got this special ability that allows him to see through disguises," Bai Xiaowen said. "Big Brother Xia, is there any way to increase your battle mastery as soon as possible? I also want to know what my special ability is." Mr. Xia Feng nodded and said, "Actually, you just need to practice step by step. First, raise your combat specialization to the expert level. This is the foundation. After that, advancing to the master level of actuarial specialization is a small threshold. After that is the grandmaster level of specialization, which is the big threshold. There's a grandmaster after the master level? Bai Xiaowen was shocked. Mr. Xiaofeng nodded. Bai Xiaowen sucked in a breath of cold air. He knew in his heart that Mr. Xiaofeng must have at least one grandmaster level specialization. According to Mr. Xiaofeng, the master level of specialization was only a small threshold, but Bai Xiaowen did not think that this threshold was low. It should be said that most Lord-level evolvers had not reached the master level of specialization. Those who could reach the master level of specialization, like Qizeng and Xia Jincheng, were considered the cream of the crop among the high-level Lord-level evolvers in the Starlink Alliance. Then there was the Queen Bee of Wuzhou territory. Her fire specialization had reached the master level a few years ago, and it was also very rare in the Starlink Alliance. If this was not the case, then the Dragon Breath Scrolls of Wuzhou territory would not have been so rare and become a highly sought-after item in the Starlink Alliance. It seems that people from the spiritual realm don't have such a powerful battle specialization. Bai Xiaowen recalled that in the Dark Age dimension, he had killed so many demon lords, including those who were demigods. However, he had not encountered anyone who was particularly skilled. It seemed that the highest level he had encountered was only at the expert level. Mr. Xiaofeng said, "Yes, no matter how strong the people from the spiritual realm are, their battle specializations are at most at the expert level. None of them have even broken through to the master level." "Why is that so?" Bai Xiaowen frowned. Mr. Xiaofeng shook his head, indicating that he did not know. "Alright, let's not think about this for now. Next, Brother Xia will attack the Dark Age dimension with me. In actual combat, it might be able to speed up the improvement of my battle specialization," Bai Xiaowen said. Mr. Xiaofeng grunted in agreement. He did not care about worldly affairs, but it did not mean that he was not clear about the situation. Now that they had signed a blood oath with the Great Yan territory, there would be no territorial wars for a year. In this year, they could quickly accumulate strength. As for why the Great Yan territory had taken the initiative to sign the contract and give the Great Xia territory and White Phoenix territory time to develop, this was probably not as simple as Bai Xiaowen having something on them. This question only flashed in Mr. Xiaofeng's mind before it was eliminated. He couldn't be bothered to think about it. In Mr. Xiaofeng's heart, using the brain was Bai Xiaowen's job. He preferred to think about how to wield his saber more concisely and powerfully. Dark Age Dimension. In the new city of Silver, Delifa Sig led a large number of demons and undead troops and bowed to Bai Xiaowen to welcome him. "Master, the new city of Silver now controls a total of more than 12,000 demons and more than 10,000 undead troops. Nothing out of the ordinary happened while the Master was away," Sigdalifer reported. The assimilation of the demon army had been ongoing. The remaining 10,000 evil demons would eventually become the citizens of the White Phoenix territory. Xiaofeng looked around, and a trace of emotion appeared on his face. Although Bai Xiaowen had already informed him of the progress of the Dark Age dimension, he couldn't help but be shocked when he saw the 20,000 to 30,000 Dark Army and the magnificence of the new city of Silver with his own eyes. "Delifa Sig, how many soul troops do you have now?" Bai Xiaowen asked. "A total of more than 400, Sig Delifa said. "Master, I've done my best. After all, creating soul slaves wasn't like creating bone slaves in batches like Abaddon." Bai Xiaowen said, "From now on, release all the ghosts and cross the blockade line to the eastern continent to secretly investigate." "Master, what information do you want to gather?" Sig Delifa asked. "Tyrant Nibras, all the information about this god's descendant," Bai Xiaowen said. "Yes." Sig Delifa first answered before saying excitedly, "Master, are you planning to attack the eastern continent? Are you going to unify the Dark Age dimension?" Bai Xiaowen said, "My target is the remaining two gods' descendants." As for why he had to attack Nibras first, it was because Thinker Rosher kept a low profile. Furthermore, he had 2 avatars left, so it wasn't easy to find them. As for Tyrant Nibras, it was easy to find him. Although Rosher said that he was the strongest of the three gods' descendants, Bai Xiaowen was confident that he could deal with him with Mr. Xiaofeng's help. Chapter 1801. Second brother, I heard that you're conquering multiple planes at the same time? The huge frost dragon flew slowly, and below it was a vast army of demons and undead. Standing side by side on the frost dragon's head, Xiaofeng asked Bai Xiaowen. Actually, there are only two. The other is the Shao plane, which is considered to be of medium to low difficulty. Xiaofeng nodded. 2 planes, I should be able to handle it. Handle it? What do you mean? Bai Xiaowen was a little confused. Xiaofeng said, when you conquer the planes, you probably have the idea of maintaining the split state, right? Of course. Bai Xiaowen did not hide it. Only by maintaining about 50% of the conquering progress and ensuring that there are 2 or even more factions in the plane will there not be a great unification. Once the plane was unified and the plane world was reconstructed, everything that had been conquered before would have to be redone. It was necessary to ensure that there were 2 evenly matched factions in the plane, or rather, factions with similar power differences. Some people might say that they could reach 99% of the conquering progress, leaving only 1 small faction, and still maintain the split state. Unfortunately, this was not realistic. People in the spiritual world had their own thoughts, not NPCs. If you ruled 99% of the world, the remaining small factions would definitely surrender, and you would not be able to stop them. Not to mention 99%, even if it was 60% to 70% of the conquering progress, there might be an imbalance in the situation, and a great unification would naturally evolve. Therefore, 50% of the conquering progress was the most worry-free for the evolvers. Xiaofeng shook his head and said, it's not easy to maintain the split state for a long time. The tendency of these plane worlds to be unified will become stronger and stronger. In the end, it will still be unified. Why? Bai Xiaowen felt that what Xiaofeng was going to say was not simple. It was knowledge of the spiritual world that he did not understand. Xiaofeng said, this is the irreversible unification rule that was summed up when many territories conquered the plane worlds. For example, those plane worlds that have never been set foot in will naturally evolve and eventually enter a great unification. This is evidence of the irreversible unification rule. In the world of the awakened ones, unification is related to advancement. Naturally, the awakened ones will support the unification process. However, in the world of the post-humans, unification is not beneficial to the post-humans. It will only erase all traces and make all previous efforts go to waste. Are the post-humans unable to stop the trend of unification? Bai Xiaowen asked. Mr. Xiaofeng said, that's right. Evolvers naturally want to stop the unification, but this law is irreversible. As time passed, you would feel more and more that the difficulty of maintaining the division of the plane was increasing. In the beginning, perhaps it was only the appearance of an outstanding genius in a certain faction, the so-called child of the dimension, that began the process of great unification. Later on, perhaps there will be famine, plagues, and other natural disasters in the opposing faction, causing one faction to rapidly decline. Natural and man-made disasters, Bai Xiaowen said with a smile. What if these difficulties can be overcome? Mr. Xiaofeng also smiled and said, don't try to challenge natural disasters. If disasters like famine and plagues are unable to promote great unification, then there might be even more terrible disasters, such as floods, volcanoes, or even the fall of stars that cause the plane to become extinct. Bai Xiaowen was slightly surprised. These are really disasters that humans cannot deal with. Moreover, the deeper the involvement of the post-humans, the more likely it is that the trend of great unification will be brought forward, Mr. Xiaofeng added. It seems that the laws of the spiritual realm do not wish for the post-humans to live too comfortably. They have to constantly open up new planes, Bai Xiaowen said. If they were not careful, the plane world that they conquered would be reconstructed. How tragic would that be? Mr. Xiaofeng nodded. But you don't have to worry too much. When you conquer a plane, such as this dark age, there will always be a few years of good times. Including the time spent conquering Tianfu territory, I estimate that there will be 3 to 5 years before the child of the plain will appear. Bai Xiaowen knew that Mr. Xiafeng mentioned this to remind him not to overexert himself when conquering the Dark Age plane. He had to maintain a certain degree to avoid the advent of great unification. Bai Xiaowen smiled and said, "It's okay. The Dark Age plane. I really don't have to occupy it for a long time." "Why is that?" Mr. Xiafeng was puzzled. "This plane produces a lot of dark energy materials, and there is a market for them in the Starlink. From what you said, you don't seem to be reluctant to leave?" Mr. Bai Xiaowen smiled and shook his head. "I can't say for sure now. Let's see if we can take care of the 2 demis first." Mr. Xiafeng was puzzled. If the 2 demis were taken care of, then the Dark Age plane would not be far from great unification. But Mr. Xiafeng was not a person who liked to ask questions. Seeing how certain Bai Xiaowen was, he did not bother to ask more. At the southern tip of the eastern continent, there was an island. This was one of the few places with beautiful scenery in the Dark Age plane. There were large clusters of natural crystals everywhere, and there were many giant non-lethal seabirds that looked like pterosaurs flying in the sky above the island. And around the island, in the dark seawater, there were many sea beasts resting nearby. But recently, the birds and sea beasts on the island had all fled. This was because the island had already been occupied by a group of uninvited guests. Every day, there would be a dozen or so powerful demons wandering around, capturing and killing seabirds and sea beasts, bringing them back to the hill at the center of the island for their master to eat. On the hill in the middle of the island sat a huge monster. It was 15 meters tall, like a half-standing dinosaur, like a combination of a human and a lizard. Its upper body had the outline of a human, with powerful arms and a fat chest. But its head was like that of a dinosaur, with sharp teeth shining with cold light. Its lower body was the body of a lizard, with 4 thick and fat lower limbs and a long giant tail. This giant monster was the 3rd demis of the Dark Age plane, the tyrant Nibras. Nibras' interest was only in one word: eating. The previous habitat was a rich valley with not only groups of demonized beasts, but also many fruits borne by the dark energy ebony. But now, it had become a barren land. So Nibras began another migration. This time, he crossed the ocean and came to this island that no one had ever set foot on. Groups of giant seabirds, groups of giant sea beasts. Nibras drooled at the first sight of this place. This time, he accepted his subordinate's suggestion and used demonic runes to encircle the island. It was like an invisible cage that encompassed the entire island. The sea beasts that lived here could not escape to the deep sea. The seabirds could not escape either. Every time they flew out of the island, they were separated by a layer of invisible green fire. Now, Nibras was happy. There was plenty of food on this island, enough for him to eat for at least a month. Within a month, he did not have to think about the next migration. Chapter 1802. On the southern coast of the eastern continent. I didn't expect Nibras to cross the sea to find food. No wonder the Ghost Reconnaissance team couldn't find anything after so many days of investigation. Beside Bai Xiaowen was Sig Delifa, and on his right was Xiafeng. Sig Delifa smiled and said, "Fortunately, the tyrant ate all the way and left enough obvious traces for us to track. This guy is too careless. He probably didn't expect that someone on this continent would dare to target him." Bai Xiaowen smiled and turned back to look at the neatly arranged undead army. The demon army wasn't very suitable to deal with tyrant Nibras. On the one hand, it was still difficult for Bai Xiaowen to control the demon army due to its chaotic nature. He couldn't unleash the combined effect of spiritual power. On the other hand, there was no guarantee that the demon army wouldn't turn against Nibras, the strongest demon king on the continent. Therefore, the only thing that could be counted on was Bai Xiaowen's undead army of more than 10,000. Of course, in order to strengthen the army, Bai Xiaowen also specially transferred 2,000 militiamen from the new human kingdom to form a phalanx. Basically, the human kingdom's military forces were all mobilized. As compensation, Bai Xiaowen sent the demon army of the new city of silver to guard the human kingdom. Sigdelifa asked, "Master, it might be a little difficult for us to besiege Nibras on the sea." Bai Xiaowen understood what Sigdelifa meant. Although the undead army basically had spiritual power and flying wasn't a problem, they wouldn't fall to the bottom of the sea. However, flying itself consumed spiritual power. Tyrant Nibras and the powerful demon lords under his command were individually powerful. Of course, they didn't care about the consumption of flying in the air. However, the undead army that relied on the advantage of numbers to unleash their combined attack power was weak individually. The consumption of flying was considerable, and it was bound to reduce the power of the combined attack of spiritual power. What do you think? Bai Xiaowen planned to brainstorm. Ask me? Xiafeng, who was in a daze, turned his head and pointed at his nose. Bai Xiaowen coughed. Sigdelifa. Why don't you say it? Sigdelifa smiled and said, "There are two ways. Either we lure the tyrant to the coast, or we build a large number of ships." It was not impossible to build a large number of ships. The undead army had the strength of an evolver, so their ability to work was naturally much stronger than ordinary people. They were basically at the level of a crane per person. Coupled with Bai Xiaowen's commanding ability, it would not be a problem to build a batch of crude ocean-going ships as long as there was enough wood. It would only take a week at most. The first method is not suitable, Bai Xiaowen said. Unlike Isman, Tyrant Nibras doesn't have much control over the eastern continent. The fact that he hasn't discovered our movements until now is enough to prove this point. We have to complete the encirclement without alerting him and suddenly appear in front of him so that he has nowhere to escape. There was no guarantee that Nibras would not be alarmed if they lured him ashore. After all, Isman's death was no secret. Sigdelifa said, "Yes, master. We don't lack wood to build ships." I saw patches of tropical rainforests during the march, Bai Xiaowen nodded. There's no need to build overly elaborate ships. It'll take too long, and the chances of them being destroyed by the enemy will also increase. We can cut down logs and build super large rafts. Each raft only needs to be able to accommodate 1,000 people standing on it. Anyway, the undead army only needed a place to set their feet. These loyal skeleton servants did not know what bone power was. Be careful. The aftermath of a battle between experts is enough to destroy the rafts. Xiafeng gave a rare reminder. Bai Xiaowen smiled and said, "With the protection of the protective wall formed by the sturdy wall formation, it won't be that easy for those demons to destroy the rafts." Building the most primitive rafts was, of course, much easier than building ships. The 10,000 undead army worked together under Bai Xiaowen's command. In less than a day, 20 super-large rafts were completed. During this time, Bai Xiaowen did not idle around. He divided his attention and created 2 more sets of immortal talismans needed for immortal arrays. Through the use of true inner force, Bai Xiaowen felt that his mastery of the branches of immortal arts had improved. Xiafeng was rather surprised by Bai Xiaowen's ability to give orders and divide his attention to create immortal talismans at the same time. "How did you do it? It seems like you can do more than divide your attention." Bai Xiaowen smiled. "It seems like I was born to be good at this, no wonder. After all, you're a commander-type lord who used to be a summoner." Xiafeng nodded slightly, then shook his head inexplicably. "I can't do that." "Every profession has its own specialization," Bai Xiaowen said with a smile. When the preparations were almost done, Bai Xiaowen gave the order. The undead army stepped onto the rafts in batches, connected the 20 rafts, and set off toward the island. Before approaching the island, Bai Xiaowen made some arrangements. "Since we have to prevent Nibras from escaping, we have to set up the array in advance." Bai Xiaowen said, "According to our prior investigation, there is a circle of crude demonic runes around the island. It should have the effect of confining space. In addition to this set of demonic runes, I will set up an 8-gate golden lock immortal array. This way, even if Nybros removes the demonic runes at the last moment, he won't be able to escape. After a pause, Bai Xiaowen said, however, the tyrant Nybros still arranged for some demons to stand guard around the island. In addition, there is a group of demons who hunt for food for Nybros wandering around. When we set up the array, we have to be careful not to be discovered by the demons on the island. Brother Xia, you and Sig Delifa will accompany me on this trip. Originally, Bai Xiaowen really wasn't confident that they could complete the setup of the array without alerting the demons on the island. However, with Xiafeng as a strong helper, Bai Xiaowen was much more confident. Bai Xiaowen concealed the aura of the three of them. At the same time, the three of them used a trace of spiritual power to form a protective membrane around themselves, and dived toward the island. When they got close, Bai Xiaowen first captured a chief-level demon. After searching its soul and interrogating it, he also figured out the security situation around the island. There are a total of 4 sentry posts, each guarded by 4 chief-level demons, distributed at the 4 corners of the island. The 4 demon chief-level demons all have means of communication and warning between themselves. If one is alerted, the other 3 will also receive the alarm. Under a steep sea cliff, Bai Xiaowen explained the situation to Xiafeng and Sig Delifa. Setting up an array on the sea is different from setting up on land. There will definitely be fluctuations of spiritual power or even spiritual power rays. So, we have to take care of these 4 sentry posts without alerting Nybros. It's very difficult. The 4 demon sentry posts were more than 10 kilometers apart from each other. Although Bai Xiaowen was confident in instantly killing a demon lord, he wasn't confident in killing 4 in a row without them even being able to send out a warning signal. Xiafeng said, I'll be responsible for 3, so that they won't have time to call the police, right? Bai Xiaowen nodded. Mr. Xiafeng pulled out the broken blade from his back and gently stroked the surface of the blade. His expression became unusually focused. You guys are in charge of the south. I'll take care of the east, west, and north. Bai Xiaowen nodded and slapped a warning jade talisman into Xiafeng's hand. Once the jade talisman breaks, it means we've made a move. Attack immediately. Bai Xiaowen believed that Mr. Xiafeng wouldn't make an uncertain promise. It seemed difficult to instantly kill 3 demon lords that were more than 10 kilometers apart, almost impossible, but since Mr. Xiafeng had said it, it meant that he was quite confident. Taking a step back, even if Nybros was alerted, Bai Xiaowen wasn't without a backup plan. That was the space disruptor he had obtained from Goldenstone Lord Shiryu, which could also cause spatial disruption. It was just that the space disruptor didn't have a higher priority than the immortal array, and it didn't have the ability to isolate space. If Nybros could fly fast enough, he could escape with his life even if he didn't use abilities such as teleportation. Of course, Bai Xiaowen judged that Nybros was a demon lord with high strength and constitution, so his speed might not be too fast. The space disruptor was also a trump card with a high success rate. Xiafeng's figure was like a tiger-striped shark as he silently swam to the eastern sentry post. Bai Xiaowen's spiritual sense sensed that Mr. Xiafeng had arrived at the sentry post. After a silent count, he immediately rushed out of the sea and sat on the silver throne. Qi Nurturing Art, 7 Evils Palm Print. The demon lord on the sentry post in the south of the island was held down by an illusory hand. All the bones in his body were almost crushed, and he couldn't struggle. Bai Xiaowen used his strength to drag the demon lord over. While the demon lord was in the air, he fired 3 consecutive thunder strikes, accurately hitting the demon lord's abdomen, where the demon core was. After the thunder force broke through the demon lord's protective dark energy, it penetrated the body and shattered the demon lord's demon core like a precise surgery, killing him. Done. Bai Xiaowen breathed a sigh of relief. Master's spiritual mastery is getting better and better, Sig Delifa flattered. Bai Xiaowen smiled and shook his head. Originally, it was a fixed target, where 3 thunder strikes hit the same spot at the same time. Now, it was a moving target. While the demon lord was in the air, 3 consecutive thunder strikes hit the same spot at the same time. Of course, the difficulty had greatly increased. However, this was the predictive calculation ability of Bai Xiaowen's super brain, not a qualitative change in his spiritual mastery. But Sig Delifa's praise was out of loyalty, so Bai Xiaowen didn't say anything. Instead, he said, "This shows the difference between the spirit realm lord and a real post-human. If it were people like Qi Zeng or Xia Jincheng, who have the intuition to predict danger, it would be difficult for me to kill them with this method. I don't know if Lord Xiafeng has succeeded. He has to kill 3 demon lords who are far away from each other at the same time. It's an impossible mission." Before Sig Delifa could finish his words, the space fluctuated slightly. As if he had teleported, Xiafeng appeared in front of Bai Xiaowen and Sig Delifa out of thin air. Xiafeng opened his palm, and 3 round magic cores rotated in his palm. Spatial magic? Sig Delifa asked in surprise. It's the use of spatial laws. Xiafeng didn't put on airs, and he didn't care that Sig Delifa was just a summoned creature. After my sword skills advanced to the Grandmaster level, I comprehended spatial laws, Bai Xiaowen said. When you were dueling with Lord Kenneth and faced a large group of self-destructing ferocious fire elementals, you were unscathed. Was that the use of spatial laws? Xiafeng nodded slightly. The use of spatial laws is endless. At that time, I only followed the trajectory of the spatial ripples and cut open a spatial rift, guiding the power of the explosion into it. About a year ago, you had already advanced to the Grandmaster level. Bai Xiaowen was a little emotional. Are you even stronger now? Xiafeng smiled. At that time, I had just climbed the threshold of Grandmaster. Over the past year, I haven't improved much. I've only become more familiar with the use of spatial laws. Bai Xiaowen knew that Xiafeng was just being modest. He said enviously, I wonder when I'll have a Grandmaster level specialization. Xiafeng said, if you want to learn, I can teach you. Then I won't stand on ceremony. Bai Xiaowen said with a smile as he began to set up the array. However, he also knew that this might not be useful. After all, everyone had different paths to take. However, having a Grandmaster to give pointers and share his experience was still a precious opportunity. Xiafeng also poured cold water on him. Don't get your hopes up. Your thoughts are too heavy. You won't be able to learn it well. I haven't learned it yet. Don't be in a hurry to deny it, Xiafeng shook his head. No matter if it's combat, saber arts, or sword arts, the more pure and infatuated a person is with these battle specializations, the easier it is for them to improve. This is what your sister concluded. This. Bai Xiaowen walked on the waves and kept setting up immoral talismans. At the same time, he said distractedly, is my sister also unable to learn it well? Xiafeng smiled shyly. In this aspect, she's indeed not as good as me. Seeing Xiafeng's rare expression, Bai Xiaowen thought to himself, as expected, Xiafeng admires my sister Bai Xiaohua. It seemed like Bai Xiaohua also had the same thoughts towards Xiafeng. Otherwise, she wouldn't have entrusted such an important task to him. To Bai Xiaohua, dying in Xiafeng's hands might really be a form of relief. Speaking of which, it's really a pity that I didn't see Big Brother Xiao make a move just now, Bai Xiaowen said. Just now, Bai Xiaowen's spiritual sense covered a radius of more than 5 kilometers, but he didn't find any overly strong fluctuations of spiritual power. In other words, from the time Xiafeng killed the evil demon lords on the east side to the north and west side, there wasn't the slightest bit of smoke or aura. It was as simple as picking up grass. Putting aside his amazing ability to move between 3 locations in an instant, the strength Xiafeng displayed when he killed 3 evil demon lords at the same time was the key point. Bai Xiaowen originally thought that Xia Jincheng, who could fight against 2 high-level evil demon lords at the same time, was already amazing. But compared to Xiafeng, Xia Jincheng's strength was probably not even worthy of carrying his shoes. But thinking about it carefully, it was reasonable. If Xiafeng didn't have earth-shattering combat strength, how could the Great Yan territory be so afraid of him? It should be known that even if the Great Yan territory sent experts from the Extreme Path Martial School to ambush him, they wouldn't dare to confront Xiaofeng directly. They could only rely on the power of the formation to wear him down. Chapter 1803. After getting rid of the sentries around the island, Bai Xiaowen then set up an immortal array around the island. Although there was a certain amount of light from the immortal talismans and spiritual energy fluctuations, under Bai Xiaowen's control, they did not alarm the demons on the island. After successfully setting up the array, Bai Xiaowen led the army to surround the island. When the undead army appeared around the island on giant wooden rafts, even without the sentries, the demons on the island discovered them. After all, it was difficult for the aura of so many weak undead to escape the eyes and ears of the powerful demons on the island. Whoosh! 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 It was as if a forest of birds had been startled. Figures on the island quickly rose into the air. Who dares to disturb the great tyrant, Lord Nybros? The leader of the demon lords said in a low, muffled voice. This demon lord looked at Bai Xiaowen, Sigdelifa, and Xiaofeng, who were hovering in the air. Bai Xiaowen, who was sitting on the silver throne, looked more like the commander of this undead army. Bai Xiaowen also replied in the demon language, the new ruler of the western continent, the master of the new city of silver, wishes to borrow something from tyrant Nybros. That fiend lord trembled and quickly flew to the island to report. Not long after, the sound of heavy footsteps could be heard. The huge tyrant Nybros sat on a hill. It did not fly, but its height of more than 10 meters was enough to compete with Bai Xiaowen and the other two who were hovering in the air. I have heard of thee. Isman died at thy hands. The dinosaur-like sawtooth mouth opened and closed, and tyrant Nybros' thunderous voice shook the clouds above the island. Christos! What do thou wish to borrow? Bai Xiaowen said, the remains of the demon god. Thou must be dreaming. Tyrant Nybros glanced disdainfully at the 10,000 undead army under Bai Xiaowen's command. Thou killed Isman, but it does not mean that thou hast the right to extort from me. I am completely different from Isman. Even if I use Isman's magic core as a threat, it won't work. Bai Xiaowen said in a low voice. If you don't agree, I will consider withdrawing Isman's magic core. The demon lords around Nybros changed their expressions when they heard this threat. Apart from the three divine descendants, the demon lords around them also knew the basis of this world's transformation by the demons. Only with the existence of the three divine descendants could they maintain the corruption of the dark powers in this world and ensure that the demons would not be expelled from this world. Taking a step back, the three divine descendants could be absent, but as their representative item, the magic core of the three divine descendants must be in this world. Without a single magic core, the demonization of the world would be incomplete. The degree of corruption would gradually shrink, and it would eventually revert to a normal planar world. This meant that the demons were of the world's return to where they came from. For tyrant Nybros, this was an even more serious crisis. Like Isman and Rosher, he came from that unbearable place. He would rather die than go back there. Bai Xiaowen wasn't deceiving Nybros. He really did intend to make a deal with Nybros, as long as Nybros could meet his request and hand over the death's remains in his possession. Now, he was setting up the immortal array, commanding the army, and assuming a besieging stance, all to force Nybros to submit. War was just a last resort. After all, the divine descendants' demons were not easy to bully. They might have some unknown means. However, a tyrant was a tyrant. Nybros obviously did not have Rosher's vision of the big picture. In fact, he was already furious. The three people in front of him were about as strong as the demon generals under his command. The 10,000 undead were even weaker than ants. How dare such a force threaten him? If he had not heard the rumor that Isman had died in the hands of this young human, with tyrant Nybros' temper, he would not have asked any questions. He would have just started a massacre. Now, after hearing Bai Xiaowen's threat, tyrant Nybros had no interest in continuing the discussion. Get out! Get out of here before I get angry. Nybros suddenly stood up. In fact, he had changed from his original crouching position to standing on all fours. He was a few meters taller. Like a typhoon, the pressure spread wildly. Splash! The surrounding seawater surged, setting off huge waves that were 7 or 8 meters high. However, when this wall of waves reached the wooden raft where the undead army was, it disappeared. It was as if it had hit an invisible glass wall. Like a waterfall, it poured back into the sea. Of course, the rank suppression of the descendants of gods was terrifying. However, the undead army under Bai Xiaowen's command had all signed an ancient contract with Bai Xiaowen. They could share a trace of Bai Xiaowen's divinity and would not be completely suppressed. As for Xia Feng, when Nibras unleashed the power of a descendant of gods, it was like a breeze to him. Not to mention that Xia Feng was the god of truth's chosen one. Even if he wasn't, as a top master, he had the means to resist the power of a descendant of gods. He would not be at the mercy of a descendant of gods. Bai Xiaowen shook his head slightly. Nibras, since you don't agree to the deal, I can only kill you. Boom! One after another, spiritual power concretions rose above the undead army's defensive array. Brother Xia, I will suppress Nibras. You deal with the demon lords under his command first, Bai Xiaowen said. Whoosh! Whoosh! Black spirit power whips extended from the hands of more than a dozen spirit power giants and shot toward Nibras. With Nibras' huge body, it was difficult for him to dodge so many spiritual power whips. However, he had no intention of dodging. He was directly entangled by the whips. More than 10 spiritual power giants pulled the spiritual power whips at the same time, trying to drag the tyrant's body over. However, they did not succeed. This feeling was like entangling a mountain. Humph! Gathering the power of ants is indeed something. No wonder Isman died at your hands. Feeling the power of the spiritual power whips, Nibras snorted in disdain. But I am not Isman. He twisted his head and swung his tail. A huge force surged, and the already taut spiritual power whips broke in the middle. Nibras was able to fight more than 10 spiritual power giants at the same time and still have the upper hand. He was indeed stronger than Isman. However, Bai Xiaowen was not an incompetent person. Now, he was more proficient in spiritual power concretions and joint attacks. The moment the spiritual power whips broke, he activated them again. More than 10 spiritual power giants waved their huge arms again, and the broken whips extended and became complete again. Just as Bai Xiaowen and Nibras were fighting, Xia Feng's figure floated into the air above the island like a withered leaf. At this moment, the demon lords under Nibras' command were shouting noisily and raising their weapons as they charged toward Bai Xiaowen's undead army formation. A spatial ripple streaked across, and Xia Feng's figure appeared in front of a sheep-headed demon lord without any warning. He waved his broken blade. He did not know if it was an illusion, but Bai Xiaowen seemed to be able to see an extremely small black light on Xia Feng's broken blade. It was like a spatial rift attached to the broken blade. The sheep-headed demon lord's charging motion did not change, but its body was split in two, and the cross-section was as smooth as a mirror. There was no bloody horror. It was as if the demon blood spurting out of its blood vessels had been sucked into the spatial rift. The other demon lords were shocked and terrified. They all changed directions and besieged Xia Feng. Powerful green flames locked onto Xia Feng's position and bombarded him. Powerful energy attacks had a certain degree of suppressive power. Being locked onto by so many green flames, the air around Xia Feng seemed to have solidified into an iron plate. It was not easy to dodge or move around. However, when the energy of the green flames converged, Xia Feng's figure suddenly disappeared again, and he easily dodged the group bombardment this time. 1 turn, 2 turns, 3 turns. Like a bolt of lightning, he changed directions 3 times in the midst of the group of demon lords. The heads of the 3 demon lords fell into the sea along with their bodies. The green light in their eye sockets slowly dissipated. Bai Xiaowen was deeply shocked. This was Xia Feng's strength. Killing demon lords was like slaughtering chickens and dogs. Looking at Xia Feng's aura, he did not seem to have lost much. It was as simple as plucking a few stalks of grass. A master-level specialization, is it really that powerful? Sig Delifa was also shocked. Although he knew that Xia Feng had the ability to kill many demon lords in an instant when he had cleared out the demon sentries earlier, it was still very shocking. After all, witnessing it with one's own eyes was still more shocking. With Sig Delifa's current strength, which was infinitely close to king level, he did not dare say that he could last more than a few seconds against Xia Feng's blade. Bai Xiaowen said, a master-level specialization shouldn't be that powerful. In the end, it's because Xia Feng's own strength is too strong. A master-level sword technique specialization was definitely not enough. It was supplemented by a powerful combat specialization, rich combat experience, and elite spiritual power attributes. Xia Feng was able to add the power of space to the blade. It was as if he was holding a divine weapon with an SSS level of sharpness. Naturally, it was extremely easy for him to cut down these demon lords whose combat specialization was far lower than his own. He did not even need to expend too much spiritual power. In the end, it was because the power of space was too strong. However, how many people could combine their understanding of the law of space and sword technique to such a proficient level? Bai Xiaowen deeply felt that he was not strong enough. However, he could only watch for a short few seconds. On the other side, Tyrant Nibras gradually entered a serious combat state. He could not allow Bai Xiaowen to be distracted too much. Controlling more than a dozen spiritual power giants was already a task that was completely impossible for ordinary people. Whoosh! Nibras once again broke free from the restraints of the spiritual power whips. He pulled out a huge double-edged longsword out of thin air and waved it like a windmill. He cut all the attacking spiritual power whips into the most basic spiritual power particles and dispersed them. After getting rid of these pestering whips, Nibras' huge body charged forward angrily. The tip of the double-edged longsword pointed in Bai Xiaowen's direction. A beam of dark green devilish flame energy wrapped around Nibras' forward momentum and shot out at full speed. Bai Xiaowen suddenly sensed a hint of danger. This dark green demonic fire energy almost locked down the space around Bai Xiaowen, causing the air to become extremely condensed. It was difficult to even move one's arm. Fortunately, transposition was a displacement skill of the space jump type, not an acceleration running skill like the charge type. It would not be affected by Nibras' lock-on. Bai Xiaowen immediately used transposition and rose into the sky with his throne. Fortunately, Sig Delifa was also fighting with the demon lords. If he had been by Bai Xiaowen's side, he would probably have been killed. Bang! The powerful demonic fire energy blasted through the spiritual power wall of one of the undead army formations and landed on the surface of the sea in the distance. It exploded into a huge wave peak. So powerful, it was Bai Xiaowen's first time seeing the spiritual power wall formed by the undead army formation of 1,000 people being easily penetrated like paper. Fortunately, Bai Xiaowen was suspended in the air and was not in the middle of the undead army formation. Otherwise, this undead army formation would definitely be finished. Even the super-large wooden raft on which it was on would be dismembered. Bai Xiaowen immediately urged the spiritual power giants to change their minds. They switched from restraining and controlling Nibras to attacking and causing damage. More than a dozen spiritual power giants, holding the codex in their hands, launched long-range attacks on Nibras. Rustling sounds of the air being torn rang out continuously. Black spears of spiritual power shot out one after another. Nibras impatiently waved his double-edged broadsword, shattering and blocking most of the spears of spiritual power. However, his fighting style belonged to the open and closed type. He was not meticulous. 2 of the spears of spiritual power still hit his chest. The moment he was hit, the runes on Nibras' chest flowed with light, as if a large piece of armor had grown out in an instant. The 2 spears of spiritual power hit the armor plate and broke inch by inch. It's a divine artifact. Bai Xiaowen's Eye of Evolution had been observing Nibras. Just now, his blood flow did not accelerate, his muscles did not contract, and his dark energy did not move in a special way. If not for the help of the divine artifact, it was impossible for a piece of armor plate to suddenly appear and block the attack. Delafa Sid was also paying attention to the situation on this side. Seeing this scene, he telepathically said, "Master, this is bad." Nybros was already tough to begin with. Now that he had a defensive divine artifact, how was he supposed to fight him? Even if he could suppress him, it would be difficult to kill him. No wonder this guy was like a pain in the ass, refusing Bai Xiaowen's request without hesitation. He really had the capital to be willful. When he killed Isman, he relied on Isman's underestimation of the enemy and took the initiative to leave the Silver Throne, which meant that he did not have the buff of the divine artifact. Now, Nybros' defensive divine artifact seemed to be a portable equipment that grew out of his body. If he wanted to kill Nybros, he definitely could not bypass this defensive divine artifact. Bai Xiaowen also felt that it was a little tricky. However, Nybros' response to the dozen spears of spiritual power just now made Bai Xiaowen ponder. If the divine artifact's defensive power was so strong, why did Nybros still use his double-edged broadsword to block most of the spears of spiritual power, and only let one or two of the spears of spiritual power hit his body and use the divine artifact to block them? Chapter 1804. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes. He thought of many possibilities in an instant. One thing was for sure, Nybros' defensive artifact could not be used indefinitely to offset damage for him. Otherwise, Nybros could go on a rampage. Bai Xiaowen could manipulate the spiritual giants to attack and put all his evil energy into the attack. Wouldn't that be even stronger? After discovering that Nybros had a defensive artifact, Bai Xiaowen changed his mind again. That was to first stall Nybros, slowly cut off his wings, and finally besiege him with Xiafeng. The 8 Gates Immortal Array was activated. The 8 gates flashed alternately as they evolved into different areas. Finally, they settled on the Gate of Rest. The Gate of Rest area could interfere with the operation of spiritual power and weaken the outburst of spiritual power. After Nybros was disturbed by the 8 Gates Immortal Array, he no longer had that amazing destructive power. He roared and stretched out his double-edged sword. He took half a step forward again, and a beam of demonic fire shot out from the tip of the sword. This time, he learned to be smart. He did not point at Bai Xiaowen and make useless efforts. Instead, he pointed the tip of the sword at a wooden raft formation of the army of the dead. However, this demonic fire was about 30% weaker than the previous one. With a loud bang, the demonic fire beam collided with the impregnable wall formation. Ripples surged, and the army of the dead was pushed back hundreds of feet. The waves were so turbulent that they almost capsized the raft. Fortunately, the impregnable wall formation was not broken. The huge waves only hit the chi wall of the impregnable wall formation and did not really damage the raft. This time, the army of the dead finally blocked the attack and continued to push forward on the rafts. In addition to diverting his attention to manipulate the dozen spiritual giants to continue entangling the tyrant Nybros, Bai Xiaowen himself poured his firepower on the group of demon lords. Xiafeng relied on the powerful maneuverability brought about by the law of space. Under the siege of a group of demon lords, he was still at ease. The attacks of the many demon lords couldn't even touch the corner of his clothes, and the occasional slash he made while dodging the attacks was accurate and fatal. However, facing a group of lords, Xiafeng was still very cautious. His output was strong enough, and his mobility was strong enough, but in terms of resistance, he was actually not high. Compared to ordinary demon lords, even if he was stronger, it was limited. If these demon lords used some kind of control skill to hit him, even if it was only for an instant, their energy barrage would be enough to severely injure or even kill Xiafeng on the spot. If it weren't for this, Xiafeng would have already wiped out these demon lords with his DPS. Bai Xiaowen saw everything clearly, so of course he had to cooperate with Mr. Xiafeng. He raised a finger and activated his primordial lightning. Snake-like lightning snakes slithered towards the group of evil demon lords. Under Bai Xiaowen's nimble control, the lightning snake split into two, 2 into 4, and 4 into 8. Countless tiny branches extended, enveloping the group of evil demon lords under the lightning snake. This weakened the power. Even if the lightning snake hit, it wouldn't cause any damage to the evil demon lords. It could only break through their defenses. However, it was enough to break through their defenses. The lightning snake's evil destroying effect and paralyzing properties caused the evil demon lords who were hit to slow down for a moment, their bodies stiffening. Mr. Xiaofeng seized the opportunity. His figure once again turned and flew like a chain of lightning. After 3 turns, he swept past 3 evil demon lords. With a light wave of his broken blade, he chopped off 3 sinister heads. Bai Xiaowen's Eye of Evolution could clearly see that after Mr. Xiaofeng used this move, his body had stagnated for a moment. The contraction of his muscles, the flow of his blood, and the circulation of his spirit energy all needed a short moment to reorganize. This was probably a warrior's weakness. After using a powerful move, it was inevitable that they would need a certain amount of time to catch their breath. This was also the so-called flaw, or move stiffening. During this moment of move stiffening, even with Mr. Xiaofeng's ability, it was difficult for him to immediately use his space maneuvering ability. Therefore, without Bai Xiaowen's cooperation, Mr. Xiaofeng wouldn't easily expose his flaw. Of course, there weren't many people who could see his flaw and make timely judgments to effectively attack him. If it weren't for Bai Xiaowen's Eye of Evolution, he definitely wouldn't have been able to predict the location of Mr. Xiaofeng's flaw, as well as the location where he paused for a moment after making his move. With Bai Xiaowen's cooperation, Mr. Xiaofeng quickly killed all of the Tyrant Nibraw's minions. This was where Nibraw's was inferior to Isman. His greatest desire was to eat, and his temperament was also very tyrannical. Although the demons admired Nibraw's strength and were willing to join him, there weren't many demons who could handle Nibraw's daily task of collecting delicacies and his temperament. There were only a few dozen demon minions around Nibraw's. Most of them were demon lords, and a small number of them were rare demon leaders. They couldn't be compared to Isman's army. After killing the last demon lord, Mr. Xiaofeng lightly swung his broken blade, took half a step back, and traveled through space to Bai Xiaowen's side. "How are you?" Bai Xiaowen asked. "I need to rest for a while." Even with the power of space, Mr. Xiaofeng could kill the demon lords at the smallest cost. After killing so many powerful enemies, Mr. Xiaofeng still consumed a lot of energy. He would have to face a demigod-level demon next. He couldn't casually participate in the battle without recovering to his peak state. Bai Xiaowen nodded and said, "I can stall for another 3 minutes." "That's enough." Mr. Xiaofeng took out a small jade bottle from his storage ring and drank the liquid inside. Then he floated cross-legged beside Bai Xiaowen, slowly recovering his energy. For an expert at Mr. Xiaofeng's level, he didn't just need to recover his spiritual power. More importantly, he needed to recover his exhausted mind. Bai Xiaowen continued to control the dozen spiritual power giants. Together with the 8-gate immortal array, they tried their best to stop Tyrant Nibraw's crazy charge. 2 minutes later, Mr. Xiaofeng opened his eyes. "You've recovered?" Bai Xiaowen asked telepathically. "Tell me, how should we fight?" Mr. Xiaofeng asked telepathically. Bai Xiaowen nodded slightly and said something to Mr. Xiaofeng. "Got it." Mr. Xiaofeng's reply was simple. Bai Xiaowen used one of the dead demon lords to activate the sacrificial flag skill. 2 minutes ago, when he killed the last few demon lords, Bai Xiaowen had already activated the sacrificial flag skill. He sacrificed the enemy and chose the option of sacrifice to God to increase the explosive power of his troops. However, during these 2 minutes, Mr. Xiaofeng was resting, so Bai Xiaowen didn't activate the skill. Now that the sacrificial flag and sacrifice to God skills were activated, each spiritual power giant's size instantly increased by 20%. Their spiritual power aura also became more vigorous and powerful. The long whips of spirit power quickly turned into thick chains of spirit power. More than a dozen black ropes shot out from different directions and fastened onto Tyrant Nibraw's head, 2 arms, for lower limbs, and tail respectively. Under the tearing of more than a dozen spiritual power giants, Tyrant Nybraw's limbs were stretched taut in an instant. Mr. Xiafeng seized this short moment of opportunity. His figure slid into the battle circle like a black falcon. 1 turned into 2, 2 turned into 4, and 8 doppelgangers appeared around Tyrant Nybraw's at the same time. All 8 Mr. Xiafeng slashed at the void. Dimensional slash. Slender black blades slid out from the tip of the broken blade and slashed at Nybraw's neck, wrist, lower limb joints, and so on in an attempt to dismember him. After this attack, the 8 Xiafengs instantly merged into one. It was as if the 8 clones from before were just an illusion that others had seen wrongly. The 8-dimensional slashes cut through Nybraw's protective dark energy from different directions and then touched his limbs. Could the limbs of the demigod withstand the cutting of the dimensional fissure? Nybraw's roared as pieces of armor appeared on the surface of his body. The defensive divine artifact was activated again. Squeak! The jarring sound of fingernails grinding continued. The 8-dimensional slashes fell on the armor formed by the defensive divine artifact, but failed to cut through it and dissipated. This defensive divine artifact is tough enough, Bai Xiaowen said with a smile. Nybraw's defensive divine artifact was more than 1 order of magnitude stronger than Bai Xiaowen's silver throne in terms of defensive performance. The silver throne could be pierced by the Starlink assassin Qi Zheng's impermanence all. But this defensive divine artifact could block Mr. Xiafeng's dimensional slash. In terms of strength, Mr. Xiafeng was far superior to Qi Zheng. In terms of damage, the dimensional slash should be much stronger than the impermanence all. Of course, the silver throne was just a seat divine artifact, not a defensive divine artifact. The function of the throne was not in defense. Mr. Xiafeng had used a lot of energy to make that move. He took a long breath and slowly exhaled, calming his breathing. Then he asked, "What should we do?" The divine artifact's defensive performance is excellent. It covers all directions. Tyrant Nybraw's had also broken free of the spiritual chains and roared angrily. "You want to kill me? Dream on. I have the armor of the gods, and I stand firmly in an invincible position. Christos, when your army runs out of energy, it will be the time of your death." His voice was like thunder, echoing over the island. After a pause, Nybra stopped attacking and said coldly, "I will give you a chance now. Leave immediately and swear not to disturb the eastern continent in the future." Bai Xiaowen smiled and shook his head. "If you had been so calm from the beginning, maybe I would have been fooled. But unfortunately, your initial reaction has already shown the weakness of this divine armor." "Impossible, my divine armor is flawless," Bai Xiaowen continued, "Nybraw's, so you can understand the human language." Bai Xiaowen did not use the demon language just now. Bai Xiaowen smiled and continued, "If the divine artifact was really flawless, you wouldn't be so easy to talk to and be willing to let us go. Originally, I thought that the divine artifact's protection was limited. But now it seems that there should be another possibility. There is a limit to the number of times the divine artifact can be activated, and it can't help you resist attacks indefinitely." Nybraw's dinosaur face did not show any expression, but his voice was filled with great anger. "Foolish mortals, go to hell." Whoosh! 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 The double-edged broadsword spun, and an endless rain of fire fell. The sea beasts and seabirds on the island and the surrounding waters were in for a bad time. The rain of fire of evil energy killed them instantly, and the rolling green evil energy polluted the entire island and the nearby waters. On a dozen super-large rafts, the formation of the army of the dead was neat, and the spiritual power wall of the impregnable wall formation blocked the erosion of the fire rain like an eggshell. In the face of such terrifying power, Bai Xiaowen was more relaxed. He sat on the silver throne, and his protective vital inner force spread out, protecting Xiafeng, Sig, and Delifa. The rolling fire rain, other than wasting Nybraw's evil energy, did not hurt the three of them at all. Of course, as a descendant of the gods, Nybraw's evil energy was almost endless, and he did not care about this little consumption. Continue to attack, maintain the pressure on him. Soon, we will exhaust the number of times the defensive divine artifact can be used up. Bai Xiaowen whispered to Xiafeng. You're the main attacker, and I'll cover and interfere with his judgment. Make sure that every time you slash, you force him to use the divine armor at least once. Xiafeng nodded solemnly. The dozen or so spiritual giants waved their chains. At the tip of the black chain, the spiritual power expanded and turned into a huge black ball, which smashed toward Nybros. Bai Xiaowen had hit the nail on the head. Nybros did not dare to use the defensive divine artifact, and could only rely on his double-edged broadsword to resist the bombardment of the black balls of spiritual power. He looked like a mess, but Nybros did not despair. Of course, he could tell that the biggest weakness of these ants in front of him was that they did not have enough spiritual power, and their endurance was too weak. And endurance, or the ability to fight for a long time, was precisely the biggest advantage of Nybros, a descendant of the gods. Drag it out, wait until the opponent's spiritual power is exhausted, then launch a counterattack. Nybros kept roaring, persisting, and blocking the attacks of the dozen or so spiritual giants. A cold light flashed across, and Xiafeng's figure swept across the battlefield. Nybros was shocked. He could not guard against Xiafeng's surprise attack at all. Fortunately, the divine armor appeared instinctively according to his will and blocked the slash. However, this time, Xiafeng's slash was not accompanied by the power of space. It was just an ordinary slash. Within a few seconds, Xiafeng seized the opportunity and made a second slash. Again, it was not accompanied by the power of space, but once again, it tricked Nybros' defensive divine artifact into appearing. Damn worm! Nybros cursed, but he felt deeply powerless. The initiative was in the hands of others, and even if he was a descendant of the gods, he could do nothing. For Xiafeng's third slash, Nybros resisted the urge to activate the defensive divine artifact. But this time, Xiafeng used all his strength. The dark space fissure went straight in and split open a deep wound on Nybros' chest and abdomen. Nybros roared in pain and waved his broadsword in vain, trying to hit Xiafeng. But he missed, and Bai Xiaowen seized the opportunity. At least 6 black balls of spiritual power hit Nybros, leaving dents of varying depths on his body, and green blood seeped out of his skin. Time passed, and every time Xiafeng attacked with the help of Bai Xiaowen, Nybros could not decide whether to summon the divine armor and consume the precious number of times it could be used. Bai Xiaowen's guess was not entirely correct, but it was very close to the truth. Every time the divine armor was activated, it would consume the divine power of the divine artifact itself. Nybros' evil energy could not activate the divine artifact. This was the source of the limit of the number of times it could be used. It was not wrong to call it a limit. Chapter 1805. The tyrant Nybros was completely at a disadvantage. No matter how hard he struggled, he could not get rid of the defensive barrier brought about by his large body. If he was facing an ordinary enemy, his tough demonic skin could ignore most of the damage. But now, he could not. Whether it was Xiafeng's dimensional slash or Bai Xiaowen's spiritual giant attack, they were enough to break through his dark energy and demonic skin defense and hurt his demonic body. In this way, he had to frequently use the divine artifact to defend against the damage to his vital parts. It was not surprising that Nybros was suppressed. Not to mention Xiafeng, who was a monster-level powerful lord of combat. Bai Xiaowen's dozens of spiritual manifestations were equivalent to the combat strength of dozens of high-ranking king-level masters. It was just that his combat specialization was lame. However, Nybros' combat specialization was not strong enough to break through the expert level and advance to the master level. Master-level specialization was always a level that spiritual creatures could not reach. No matter how strong they were, they had to succumb to this iron law. If Nybros' specialization had reached the master level, he would have the ability to foresee danger like Qizeng, Xia Jincheng, or even Xiafeng. He would be able to use the divine artifact in a targeted manner and would not be forced to use it too many times by Xiaofeng's feint. In that case, Nybros could rely on his unparalleled dark energy reserves and strong physique to fight by Xiaowen's side. The final victory would not be a dream. In just a few minutes, Nybros was forced to use the last use of the divine artifact. He could not hide anything even if he wanted to. Bai Xiaowen's eyes could see through people's minds. He could clearly grasp Nybros' true intentions. Then he telepathically communicated to Xiaofeng, allowing the latter to switch between feinting and killing, taking advantage of Nybros. Nybros was just about to hide something when Xiaofeng's dimensional slash cut off a section of his giant tail. The pain was excruciating. Therefore, Xiaofeng did not dare to gamble with the next slash aimed at his throat. He exhausted the last of the artifact's energy and summoned the last of the artifact's armor. However, this time, Xiaofeng's attack was just a feint. The blade did not have any spatial power, and it disappeared as soon as it touched the blade. This made Nybros gnash his teeth in anger. Now that the divine artifact's energy had been depleted, whether it was the undead army under Bai Xiaowen or Xiaofeng himself, they still had more than half of their spiritual energy left, so they had no problem fighting. Roar! Nybros leaped into the air and landed heavily on the ground. A visible wave of air surged out and spread rapidly. It was as if a giant meteorite had landed, bringing with it a terrible wind pressure that spread in all directions. The surrounding sea water instantly rose into a wall of waves that was dozens of meters high. Although the undead army on more than a dozen rafts had spiritual energy walls that could withstand the frontal impact of the tide, the rapidly rising sea level still caused many rafts to sway. The standing position of the undead army was affected, which directly affected the stability of their spiritual energy output. The spiritual giant above their heads also swayed and flickered for a while. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Nybros opened his dinosaur mouth and sprayed out green fire runes that shot around Xiaofeng. Xiaofeng wanted to use the spatial ripples to teleport away, but he found that this circle of green fire runes had some kind of spatial confinement effect, so the teleportation failed. Xiaofeng's reaction was also fast. He immediately slashed horizontally with the dimensional slash, shattering this circle of green fire runes. However, this slash was enough for Nybros to launch a fatal attack. He rushed half a step forward, his double-edged broadsword wrapped in dark green demonic fire, and slashed down at Xiaofeng's head. The surrounding air was almost solidified. Xiaofeng felt the pressure suddenly increase. Even moving his arm took several times more effort, let alone dodging in the air. Oh no! Xiaofeng found that he still lacked experience in fighting against a high-level deity. He shouldn't have exposed a flaw that caused him to be unable to dodge the green fire runes that imprisoned space. He was one step late, and then another. When he broke the confinement force of the green fire runes, Nybros' fatal blow was already close at hand. Swish! With a soft sound, the silver throne appeared in front of Xiaofeng. Bai Xiaowen took a deep breath, his face turning abnormally red. He suddenly pushed out his palm toward Nybros' double-edged broadsword. It looked like only a single palm, but it brought out 7 palms the size of a door. It was as if the palms had overlapped, making this palm even more powerful. Its power had reached a level that even Xiaofeng was shocked. After swallowing a super-strength pill at the last minute, Bai Xiaowen used the double amplification of the silver throne and struck out 2 7 palm prints at the same time. One was 3 palms in one, while the other was 4 palms in one. Bai Xiaowen's mastery of the 7 evils palm prints was now more than 10 times stronger than Qiuzhenli's. The 2 7 evils palm prints combined into one and instantly took away nearly 1,000 points of Bai Xiaowen's true inner force. Fortunately, with the double recovery ability of the Silver Throne, Bai Xiaowen's spiritual power endurance was shockingly strong, so he could be at ease and act boldly. The dark green demonic fire blade radiance collided with the 7 evils palm prints in the air. After a short stalemate, the 7 evils palm prints were utterly defeated. Even with the double amplification, Bai Xiaowen was still not strong enough to face the demigod head-on. And because he had used all his strength to launch the seven evils palm prints, Bai Xiaowen had lost the ability to escape in the face of the blade radiance that continued to extend toward him. He didn't even have the strength to use the teleportation technique. He had to catch his breath and recover his strength before he could have the time to do so. Once the blade radiance hit him, Bai Xiaowen would most likely die on the spot. Even with the life-sharing link, there was no guarantee that he wouldn't die on the spot after being split in half. However, Bai Xiaowen still had Xia Feng behind him. Xia Feng got a chance to catch his breath and immediately pressed down on Bai Xiaowen's shoulder with one hand. The broken blade in his right hand slashed diagonally, and a spatial ripple was drawn over. In the next second, Xia Feng took Bai Xiaowen and disappeared on the spot, along with the silver throne. Bai Xiaowen took action this time because he trusted Xia Feng and entrusted his life to Xia Feng. He knew that Xia Feng wouldn't betray his trust. And although Xia Feng didn't say anything, how could he not be shocked in the depths of his heart? Whoosh! Nybros blade radiance extended diagonally, and the green fire blade radiance split a cliff at the end of the island into a rift valley. Billowing seawater continued to pour in. The island shook violently. The island is going to collapse, Xia Feng said in a low voice. In the past, the demigod thinker, Rosher, had once launched an earthquake and buried a human city. Now, Nybros' blade had shaken the foundation of the island in a purely physical way, causing a small earthquake and burying the island. It wasn't strange. Chapter 1806. The earthquake caused by Nybros shook the 8-gate immortal array that Bai Xiaowen had set up in advance. In an instant, the doors of the 8-gate immortal array opened, and 7 or 8 huge cracks appeared in the array. He can't escape. Bai Xiaowen waved his hand, and a series of immortal talismans shot out and sank into the sea at an angle. At the point of impact, rays of light rushed out from the bottom of the sea and instantly filled the gap in the array. It was like an old train that continued to run after a few knocks. Xia Feng nodded his head in admiration. Bai Xiaowen's profound attainment in the art of array was obvious, but his ability to remain calm and respond in time was even more commendable. Only such a leader was worthy of his broken blade, to charge and break through the enemy lines. The attack just now had consumed a lot of Nybros' physical strength and dark energy, and he was panting heavily. After the wave wall passed, the dozen or so phalanxes of the dead returned to order, and the spiritual giant solidified again. A new wave of attack came like thunder. Nybros had lost the opportunity to use his divine armor, and when he blocked the spiritual giant's black balls, he seemed to be struggling. Xia Feng continued to look for opportunities, and like a fierce eagle, he swooped down and left a deep wound on Nybros' body. As time passed, the surface of Nybros' huge demonic body was covered with wounds of different sizes and depths. Dark green demonic blood dripped on the ground, leaving smoke behind. He finally couldn't hold on any longer. His demonic blood was almost drained, and his health was almost depleted. At this time, the island was in the midst of the earthquake and was gradually sinking, and the sea was rising to the high ground. Don't even think about, Bai Xiaowen didn't let him finish his words, and a dozen black balls came crashing down like hailstones. Now that the spiritual power of the army of the dead was running low, and Xia Feng was also close to exhaustion, they had to end the battle quickly, and there was no time to waste. Bang, 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 in the violent explosion, Nybros kept retreating, and even his bones were broken. A black light flashed. Xia Feng's figure moved horizontally and slashed at Nybros' neck. This slash contained all of Xia Feng's remaining strength. Supported by the power of space, the broken blade extended a 3-meter-long black blade aura. In fact, this was not a blade aura, but a large spatial rift. Great Dimensional Slash. Xia Feng's mastery of the Great Dimensional Slash hadn't reached the point where it could leave the body and attack from a distance. He could only use it in close combat. Nybros had also lost the ability to fight back. His terrifying head was cleanly cut off. A mouthful of demonic blood soared into the sky, reaching a height of 30 feet. Nybros' final health points were also completely wiped out. His magic core is hidden in his head. Bai Xiaowen panted. Brother Xia, catch his head. Right at this moment, a sudden change occurred. A purple figure appeared like a bolt of purple lightning, and a sharp light went straight for Xia Feng's throat. Although Xia Feng had the heart mirror and the law of space, he had used up all of his strength in order to cut off Nibra's head. Even if he sensed danger, he couldn't dodge. In an instant, a strong pressure suddenly spread from Bai Xiaowen's direction and swept across the entire area. Even Xia Feng was within the range of the pressure. Deterrence. The purple figure paused. Obviously, it was also affected by the deterrence. With a crackling sound, a thin thunderbolt fell between the purple figure and Xia Feng. If the purple figure continued to attack Xia Feng, it was bound to be hit by this thunderbolt. Unexpectedly, the purple figure chuckled. With a somersault, it changed direction in the air and let go of Xia Feng. It turned back to grab Nibra's huge head that was falling to the ground. It turned out that the purple figure's goal wasn't Xia Feng from the beginning. It was just a feint. His real goal was to seize Nibra's head. To be exact, he wanted to seize Nibra's demon core. If Bai Xiaowen didn't have the Eye of Evolution, he would definitely be fooled. This had nothing to do with intelligence. Xia Feng was Bai Xiaowen's most important ally, and he was also someone that Bai Xiaowen regarded as an elder brother. Now that Xia Feng was in danger of dying, Bai Xiaowen naturally had to protect Xia Feng without being able to determine whether it was real or fake. The purple figure was bound to take Nibra's head. However, Bai Xiaowen had the Eye of Evolution. He could clearly see the movement of the purple figure's bones, blood, and muscles, and predict the other party's subsequent actions. Crackle, crackle. Two thin thunderbolts directly cut off the purple figure's action of grabbing Nibra's head. There was the sound of wings flapping. The Sigdelifa flapped its wings, and the spiritual spear pierced through the air. The purple figure obviously looked down on the Sigdelifa. After all, it was suppressed by the battle specialization. He stretched out two fingers and pressed on the wide surface of the spear's tip, borrowing the force to shoot high into the sky. You're already here, and you want to leave? Bai Xiaowen opened his palm and quickly activated his primordial thunder. A serpentine thunderbolt spread out in the air, and a large number of thunderbolt tentacles covered the top of the purple figure's head. There was a cold laugh. The purple figure used some unknown method to emerge unscathed from the thunderbolt tentacles. He wasn't affected by the paralyzing effect either, and directly rushed to the edge of the 8 Gates Immortal Lock formation. His body twisted, and like a worm, he nimbly shuttled through the light of the formation. After leaving the 8 Gates Immortal Lock formation, the purple figure immediately disappeared. Are you okay? Bai Xiaowen asked Xia Feng. He was also a little worried. With his spiritual sense and the support of the heart-nurturing technique, he actually didn't notice the purple-clothed figure spying on him. This situation was really rare. Xia Feng had seen much more dangerous storms than this. His expression was very calm. This person is very powerful. When he attacked me, he was full of killing intent. If I didn't have the Mirror of Heart, I would have been tricked into using my last life-saving technique. It was because of the Mirror of Heart that Xia Feng could predict that he was scared but not in danger. He sensed that the purple figure's real goal wasn't to kill him, but to steal the demon core. Who is it? Bai Xiaowen felt that such a powerful figure couldn't be unknown in the Interstellar Alliance. Xia Feng shook his head. This spiritual aura is very obscure. I've never seen it before. When experts recognized people, they believed in spiritual aura more. This was because one's face could be disguised, but it wasn't easy to change one's spiritual aura, especially when attacking with full strength. The Great Yan region just signed a contract with us. It shouldn't be them. But other than the Great Yan region, which other Interstellar Alliance territory has such an expert? Unless it's the Divine Court or the World Illumination Order. Bai Xiaowen frowned. It was easy for smart people to complicate things. When encountering an abnormal situation, they always wanted to use the known information to find a reasonable explanation. Xia Feng said calmly, the Interstellar Alliance is full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Even the 3 core territories may not be able to gather all the talents in the world. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes and said, no matter which force it is, coming to steal Nibra's demon core means that they want to interfere with the Dark Ages plane. I just don't know what this force's real goal is. I feel that something is wrong. The next step of the plan must be carried out quickly. Chapter 1807. Although there were some twists and turns in this expedition to the eastern continent, the final result was barely satisfactory. Nibras was successfully killed, and Bai Xiaowen obtained another demonic god's core. The corpses of Nibras and his subordinates still had some value. Bai Xiaowen had the undead army drag them back to the southern beach with wooden rafts. Sigdelifa then went to search the corpses of Nibras and his subordinates for useful equipment and items. Bai Xiaowen took out the demonic god's core from Nibras' skull. After injecting a trace of true inner force, the demonic god's core glowed faintly. What are you doing? Xia Feng asked. Bai Xiaowen said, contacting the last demonic god, Rosher. Xia Feng asked again, directly contacting him? Aren't we going to make some preparations? Bai Xiaowen shook his head. The original plan didn't have to be so hasty. However, when we killed Nibras this time, I'm very concerned about the disturbances that appeared, so we have to speed up the follow-up plan. I have a bad feeling. Maybe it's too late now. Bai Xiaowen activated Nibras' demonic god's core and extended the communication range to all the demons in the entire Dark Age dimension. Using the demonic god's core to contact Rosher was impossible, so they could only use this stupid method, which was similar to a large-scale broadcast. Rosher. Rosher. I have a deal to discuss with thee. Come see me. Come see me. Bai Xiaowen repeated Nibras' words several times in demonic language before putting Nibras' core into a small leather pouch at his waist. Looking at Xia Feng's slightly inquiring gaze, Bai Xiaowen said, now, we can only do our best and leave the rest to fate. I hope Rosher can believe in my sincerity. After that, Bai Xiaowen led the army to rest and reorganize. Xia Feng also needed some time to recover his combat strength. During the short break, Bai Xiaowen roughly looked at the items after Nibras' death. Nibras was different from Isman. He was purely a tyrannical glutton who didn't accumulate any treasures, wealth, or resources at all. The only thing of value was Nibras' equipment. Double-edged broadswords, necklaces, cloaks, and other equipment required a huge body to equip. Although it was an epic equipment, it could only be shelved. Bai Xiaowen did not have any gigantic summon creatures under his command, so these epic-tier equipment could only wait to be reforged. The quality of their materials was still quite good. The only good piece of equipment was Nibras' defensive artifact. From the outside, this defensive divine artifact looked like a round crystal bead. It had a transparent shell, and a faint black mist was rolling inside. Using the Eye of Evolution, Bai Xiaowen quickly obtained information about this defensive artifact. Seed of Resonance quality, divine weapon, equipment position, accessory, equipment requirement, unknown, data disorder, beyond authority, attribute, none, additional skill 1, parasitism, passive. The Seed of Resonance will live in the wearer's body and cannot be stolen or forcibly taken away. The Seed of Resonance's toughness is SS level. It is immune to energy attacks with priority level 14 and below. Additional skill 2, data disorder, beyond authority passive. The wearer will obtain a special energy slot, data disorder, beyond authority. The energy points are 100 out of 100. Recovers 4 energy points every hour. Additional skill 3, transformation. In the parasitic state, the Seed of Resonance will change shape according to the wearer's will. Every time it transforms, the Seed of Resonance's energy will be consumed. Durability, never wear out. Description, this seed has seen the world change. Bai Xiaowen was a little surprised. I thought Nibras' defensive artifact was an inner armor. I didn't expect it to be just an accessory. This is quite good. It saves us the trouble of being unable to keep up with the demands of a huge body. Xiafeng was also attracted by this artifact. He said, "No wonder my dimensional slash couldn't break it. Not only does this seed have SS-level toughness, but the energy attacks it is immune to also have such an exaggerated priority." In the world of evolvers, the basic priority of a descendant of God was 9. In other words, even a descendant of God would need to use a super skill of at least 6-star and reach a total priority level of 15 to break the defense of the Seed of Resonance. As for king-level experts, they could forget about it. After a pause, Xiafeng said, "You can have this artifact." Bai Xiaowen was slightly startled. "Brother Xia, you don't need it?" Xiafeng shook his head. "I'm very mobile, and I'm also a combat-type lord. Once an army-level war breaks out, others won't be interested in me. As a commander-type lord, you'll be the focus of others. You're more suitable for this artifact." Bai Xiaowen waved his hand. "I already have this artifact, the Silver Throne. In terms of defense, I plan to learn some defensive skills, so I don't really need it. But you'll have to fight many powerful enemies head-on in the future. With this artifact, I'll be more at ease. It'll also save me the trouble of risking my life to save you." Xiafeng smiled. He remembered when he was fighting the descendant of God, Nibras, and was almost hit by Nibras' double-edged broadsword. Although he had life-saving means, Xiafeng's heart still palpitated when he saw Nibras cause a huge earthquake with a single slash of his broadsword and sink the entire island. No one would complain about having too much of this life-saving artifact. The two brothers pushed each other back and forth for a while. In the end, Xiafeng was still not as eloquent as Bai Xiaowen. He wasn't someone who liked to push things around, so he took this artifact. Bai Xiaowen was originally a little worried. This artifact's equipment requirements were unknown. He didn't know what strange requirements it had and whether Xiafeng could satisfy them. After Xiafeng chose to wear it, he soon received a prompt asking if he agreed to let the Seed of Resonance live in him. He chose to agree right away. The Seed of Resonance merged into his body. There was no rejection or inability to equip it. Bai Xiaowen thought for a while. The so-called unknown requirements probably had something to do with divinity. Xiafeng was the God of Truth's chosen one. He himself had divinity, so it wasn't strange that he could satisfy the parasitic requirements of the Seed of Resonance. Bai Xiaowen then boarded the Frost Dragon with Xiafeng. At the same time, he let Sigdelifa lead the undead army back. Sigdelifa asked, "Master, aren't we going to look for that Rosher?" Bai Xiaowen shook his head. "It's not easy to find Rosher. We can only wait for him to come to us. I believe that now that we have 2 cores of gods and demons, he should know what's more important." Previously, Bai Xiaowen had killed Isman and obtained a core of gods and demons. When Bai Xiaowen threatened Rosher with Isman's magic core and tried to get the bones of death from him, he was rejected. Obviously, Rosher had an alternative plan at that time, which was to summon another demigod from where he came from to fill Isman's vacancy. This way, the Dark Age plane could still maintain a stable relationship with the 3 demigods, demons, and the world wouldn't reject or expel them. However, it wasn't easy for Rosher to summon a demigod from where he came from. Otherwise, Rosher wouldn't have taken the risk to meet Bai Xiaowen and promised Bai Xiaowen to restrain his desire for research and not to cause large-scale destruction to the human cities. Now that Bai Xiaowen had 2 magic cores, it wasn't as simple as doubling the difficulty for Rosher to summon 2 demigods. Moreover, Bai Xiaowen proved to Rosher that he had the ability to kill demigods steadily. Isman's death could be attributed to Bai Xiaowen's carelessness or luck, but the death of Nibras, the strongest of the 3 demigods, was undoubtedly a great warning to Rosher. Rosher had to consider that if he didn't cooperate with Bai Xiaowen, even if he brought demigods over, they would still be killed by Bai Xiaowen one after another. Xiafeng didn't continue to ask about the negotiation with Rosher. He sat cross-legged on the Frost Dragon's spine and closed his eyes to cultivate. When Bai Xiaowen asked, Xia Feng replied that the newly acquired seed of resonance was a bit special and that he needed some time to master its usage. Only at a critical moment could it play a role in saving his life. When the army of the dead returned to the blockade line, Bai Xiaowen finally received news from Rosher. Rosher didn't come in person. Instead, he used a spell to control a magic fire crow to fly in front of Bai Xiaowen. This magic fire crow had a trace of Rosher's soul. Although it wasn't as fast as Rosher's own mind, it could still handle the task of communication. "Don't you still have 2 incarnations?" Bai Xiaowen said in the common human language. "Rosher, last time you came to see me in one of the incarnations of an old man. This time, you only dare to send a trace of your soul. Why are you getting more and more cowardly?" In the face of Bai Xiaowen's mockery, the magic fire crow that Rosher possessed just opened and closed its sharp beak and cried in a hoarse and slow voice, "Caw! You abominable outsiders are so vicious. How can I be at ease, Caw?" Bai Xiaowen's pupils shrank slightly. "Rosher, what do you mean by these? You've already seen other outsiders besides me?" He didn't need to think with his toes to know that the other outsiders Rosher mentioned were definitely not Xia Feng. If it wasn't Xia Feng, then it was most likely the strange purple shadow who suddenly appeared on the island of the eastern continent and tried to rob the demon cores. However, judging from the time, it shouldn't be Purple Shadow himself. The latter didn't have time to cross the continent and commit crimes continuously. This made the situation even more serious because Xing had an accomplice, and they didn't know how strong that accomplice was. If they were as strong as Purple Shadow, it would be very troublesome. "Caw! You know the answer." The magic fire crow that Rosher controlled cried. "The second incarnation you saw last time has been killed." "Caw!" Bai Xiaowen's heart skipped a beat. Part of his bad premonition had come true. Purple Shadow's group's goal was indeed the divine-level demons. To be exact, their goal was to seize at least 1 demon core. This way, Purple Shadow's group would at least have the capital to negotiate. The 3 divine-level demon cores were the most important items that maintained the existence of demons on this continent. Losing one of them would cause the demon's pollution to gradually decrease until it disappeared. Fortunately, Rosher had a total of 3 incarnations. Previously, one had been killed by Bai Xiaowen. Now, another had been killed by Purple Shadow's group. There was only 1 incarnation left. The last remaining incarnation was definitely Rosher's strongest and most important incarnation, so it was the most well-protected and hadn't been found by Purple Shadow's group. Rosher's demon core and Death's remains were definitely in the hands of this last incarnation. This was also easier to understand why Rosher had become so careful and only dared to use his spiritual sense to control the crows to communicate. He was afraid that if he used his last incarnation to meet Bai Xiaowen would turn hostile and kill him. That would be the end of him. The dignified descendant of God, the most powerful demon king, the thinker Roxer, had already become a bird startled by the twang of a bow. Bai Xiaowen frowned and said to Xia Feng, "Brother Xia, hurry to the new city of silver. The sooner the better." After slapping the token of being the lord of the new city of silver in Xia Feng's hand, Bai Xiaowen instructed Xia Feng, "When you reach the new city of silver, be careful of an ambush. If you don't see any enemies, help me guard the immortal array. I've placed Isman's demon core in the immortal array over there." Seeing Bai Xiaowen's serious expression, Xia Feng nodded slightly. He slashed the air with his palm, and a slight fluctuation of the power of space surged out. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared on the spot. "Master." Sigdelifa looked worried. "Are you saying that the mysterious Purple Shadow Man will snatch Isman's demon core?" Bai Xiaowen nodded and said, "Purple Shadow, and his accomplices, their goal is the demon core. They killed Rosher's incarnation but didn't get the demon core. Rosher's last incarnation must be on high alert, and it will be difficult to find it for a while. On our side, they also failed to snatch Nibra's demon core. So, they only have one choice left." Bai Xiaowen could have let Sigdelifa accompany Xia Feng back, but Sigdelifa's mobility was far inferior to Xia Feng's, and would only delay Xiafeng's speed to reach the new city of silver. Therefore, he could only let Xiafeng carry his token and rush back alone. Fortunately, the newly obtained divine artifact increased Xiafeng's survivability. Otherwise, Bai Xiaowen wouldn't be at ease with Xiafeng going alone against the mysterious and powerful Purple Shadow Team. In fact, if Bai Xiaowen was the decision-maker of the Purple Shadow Team, he would have set his sights on the new city of Silver and Isman's demon core from the beginning, and not Rosher and Nibras. The Purple Shadow Team's greatest advantage was that they were in the dark and could catch Bai Xiaowen off guard. Now, the Purple Shadow Team had already made their move, and it could be said that they had turned from the dark to the light. For Bai Xiaowen, they had already lost their best opportunity. Bai Xiaowen then looked at Rosher's crow. "Thinker, under such dangerous circumstances, you are still willing to take the risk to communicate with me. This makes me very happy. This means that our deal has a high possibility of success." Rosher's use of his spiritual sense to control the crow to meet him was actually risky. There were many spells that could be traced back to Rosher's true body through this tiny wisp of spiritual sense. Moreover, Rosher's true body couldn't be too far away from this demon fire crow. "Caw. What do you want to trade?" Rosher's crow asked. "You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.